Chapter 1753. This isn't a devil dharma body. Pilar's eyes were wide open, and his eyes were filled with an indescribable horror. He was the Demon King, yet he hadn't realized at first glance that this wasn't the devil dharma body unique to the demon race. It was far too similar. From the shadow at the beginning to the aura of the dharma body that had condensed into a solid form. The dharma body's aura, they were all demonic auras. However, the biggest difference between Yi Zichen's devil dharma body and a normal one was wings. Normal devil dharma bodies only had a pair of demonic wings and were pitch black. Yi Zichen's devil dharma body, however, had 12 wings, especially the color of the wings. Half was black, and the other half was pure white. The son of a saint and a demon. This kind of constitution really did exist. Pilar couldn't help but mutter to himself as he looked at the devil dharma body, tainted with the evil of a demon and the purity of a god. He took a few steps back and almost fell from the sky. "Be careful!" The great sage grabbed him, then looked at the illusory image behind Yi Zichen in astonishment. Pure, holy feathers fell from the wings into the sky. Yale stared intently at Yi Zichen, then at the corroded palm print on his arm, dripping with golden blood. From the palm print, he sensed the demonic aura. He also sensed the holiness of the outsider's sacred race. "My lord!" When they saw Yale's injuries, they cried out in panic. The previously pitiful god of pain's divine power surged, and he pointed his right hand at Yi Zichen. "I will bestow upon you an abyss of pain. F***CK off. Dong." While the god of pain was still casting his proverbs, the great sage had already flipped in front of him and swung his staff at the god of pain's head. "You still want to bestow pain? I'll make you suffer." This was the downside of a mage meeting a warrior. The god of pain was using proverbs, so if he wasn't mistaken, he was most likely a curse type. Curse type mages all had time to cast their spells. The great sage was clearly a close combat warrior. Just now, he'd interrupted the god of pain's attack with his staff, then sent him flying into the air. He'd beaten the god of pain until he couldn't cast any spells. Pain. The other over-gods wanted to help, but Yi Zichen's people wouldn't let them go so easily. Inshang and Go Yuzhan both headed towards the other sovereigns. Su Luer was an ice-type mage, completely unhindered by anyone. She tossed out area of effect skills as if they were free. Darkness, taste the fear of darkness. In the end, Yi Zichen's side didn't have as many people, so some of Yale's over-gods still managed to cast their spells. As soon as he finished speaking, the entire world plunged into endless darkness. Thump! A series of shrill whistles rang in everyone's ears. It felt as if there were some malicious spirits blowing in their ears. The invisible fear hidden in the darkness shrouded everyone's hearts, but, sorry, the darkness is my home field. A faint whisper suddenly rang in the ears of the Master God of Darkness. The Master God of Darkness, who was still proud of himself for casting the spell, froze in an instant. Before he could react, a pair of hands had already gripped his neck. "Do you think you're the only one who likes the darkness? I like it too." A figure suddenly appeared in the darkness. It was Yang Jian with a sneer on his face, looking at him indifferently with a mocking smile. "Oomph." Several hands suddenly appeared in the darkness and reached for Yang Jian. In the blink of an eye, Yang Jian transformed into a blur and disappeared. "Enjoy the fear brought to you by the darkness." A familiar murmur came from Yang Jian's mouth. Yang Jian had been circling around the Lord God of Darkness, occasionally giving him a punch or a kick from the dark. When the Master God of Darkness resisted, he melted back into the darkness. It could be said that Yang Jian was like a fish in water, toying with the Master God of Darkness in the palm of his hand. Darkness dispel. The Master God of Darkness could no longer endure Yang Jian's toying, so he dispelled the darkness himself. It was as if the darkness had been torn apart. When the darkness was completely gone, everyone, including the great sage and the other over-gods, remained vigilant. Yang Jian, who'd just been about to kick the Master God of Darkness again, suddenly froze. When he saw the Master God of Darkness staring at him, he scratched his head, smiled sheepishly, and waved. "Hello." As soon as he finished speaking, Yang Jian ran back without looking back. The master god of darkness held his magic staff in his hand. From his magic staff, several black silk-like threads appeared and grabbed at Yang Jian. However, no one noticed Su Yiyun, who'd previously been captured by the rhythm god, was now unguarded and floating in the air behind Yale. Whoosh! Without even thinking about it, Yi Zichen flapped his wings with all his might. A howling gale threatened to send everyone flying. He transformed into a blur and shot forward. Little did they know, neither Yale nor any of the overgods tried to stop him. It was as if they were waiting for Yi Zichen to get to Su Yiyun's side. "You can't go," the war goddess suddenly shouted. However, no one could hear her from so far away. "Big sister." The maid didn't understand, but the war goddess bit her lip. Before, Yi Zichen had given her the impression that he was smart. Why was he so stupid now? This was Yale's domain of destruction. How could he possibly bring people out so easily? Everyone else was busy fighting the overgods. Only Su Yin and the others. "You can't go." By the time she said this, it was already too late. Yi Zichen really did arrive before Su Yiyun without any resistance. "Yiyun." Yi Zichen fiercely hugged him, but Su Yiyun was already unconscious. No matter how Yi Zichen called out to him, he didn't respond. Yi Zichen gnashed his teeth and held Su Yiyun in his arms. Just as he was about to break out of the encirclement, a storm of destruction blocked his way. The overgods who'd been fighting the great sage and the others returned to their positions. They silently watched Yi Zichen, who was now surrounded. "Yi, Yang Jian and the others shouted frantically, but by then, the overgods had already surrounded Yi Zichen. Yi Zichen held Su Yiyun in his arms, all by himself as he faced Yale and the other overgods. "Star-Lord Yi, you've made a bad move." By now, the wound on Yale's arm had completely healed. However, he was still deeply interested in Yi Zichen, who'd fused the blood of both demons and sacred beasts. Chapter 1754. The icy aura continued to wreak havoc. The Divine Palace's Imperial Guards were blocked outside the breath of ice. Yi Zichen and the others followed Yang Jian and the Great Sage, then regrouped with Su Lu and the others. From start to finish, Su Lu had remained silent and focused on maintaining her ice breath to an acceptable level. Xiao Yumei, Su Yin, and company were all present. Yi Zichen didn't know what had happened to them earlier, but with the goddess of life present, they were all alive and well, and none of them were injured. "Thank goodness you're all safe and sound. I made you worry." Xiao Yumei's eyes flashed apologetically. When she'd impulsively decided to go to the outside, only to be captured by Yale, she'd already predicted this would happen. No matter what, Yi Zichen wouldn't abandon them. Even if they were in a sea of flames or a mountain of blades, he wouldn't. Yang Jian and the Great Sage both knew full well that Yi Zichen was bound to save them while they were being held captive in the God Realm. "As long as you're fine, that's good." Yi Zichen smiled amicably. He looked at the people he considered his closest family, his eyes brimming with relief. They were finally able to put down the fear they had been feeling all this time. They were all safe and sound. As for when he faced Yale later, so long as the Great Sage and the others were there, as long as he had his brothers and friends, Yi Zichen had nothing to fear. "Tell me the truth. How did you get out?" asked Yi Zichen. The Great Sage seemed to want to emphasize that they'd never been captured, that they'd simply come to the outside for a stroll. However, before he could speak, Su Lu, who'd been unleashing her icy aura, suddenly knit her brows. She turned around, her gaze sharp, and she waved her hand. A raging storm of ice and snow erupted from her palm like a roaring snow dragon. Su Lu was acting this way because she'd sensed something and given a warning. The gazes of the other people also trembled, looking in the direction of the snow dragon. They saw the roaring snow dragon, fusing with the wind and frost in the air, fiercely colliding with a mirror that was condensed from a void. Bang! The snow dragon turned into snow and fell from the sky. A crack appeared in the mirror. "Eat my staff!" The Great Sage hollered in rage. The golden cudgel in his hand filled the sky with shadows of the cudgel. The cudgel was infused with ice and snow, and it seemed like it was going to tear the sky apart. The great sage's staff landed on the already cracked surface of the mirror, and countless more cracks appeared on it. Star-Lord Yi, your subordinates are too unfriendly. Without waiting for the mirror to shatter, a hand reached out from behind the mirror, shattering it into countless fragments of crystal that blended with the wind and snow, disappearing into Su Luer's icy aura. Yale slowly walked out from the mirror with his hands behind his back. As expected, the 10 over-gods under him followed him. The appearance of these people instantly increased the pressure on Yi Zichen's side. Su Luer, who had been releasing her aura of ice, also raised her eyebrows. The ice breath was cut off. She could understand if it was a large-scale defense. No matter what, this was the god race. From the time she had spent in the god race, she could tell that the experts here were more than a level higher than the god, Yao, and fiend races. He wanted to isolate her ice breath from a certain area or completely seal it in a certain space. Either way, she could accept it. However, what she saw now wasn't what she expected. Her ice breath had been cut off from within. In other words, the place where Yale and the others stood was less than 100 cubic meters. Everywhere else, her ice breath was normal, but there. She tried to use her ice breath to fill up that area, but found that any ice breath that reached that area would be annihilated by an invisible force. Su Luer looked deeply at Yale. The great sage and Yang Jian stood by Yale's side. Their nerves were tense, and their hands tightly gripped their weapons. This youth had left a deep impression on them. He was the reason they'd been forcibly dragged to the god race for a visit. It wasn't as if they hadn't fought back. Their crushing defeat was still fresh in their minds. Yi Zi, this guy's abilities are incredible. Yang Jian, Luer, and I joined forces, but we couldn't last more than 10 rounds against him. That's only natural. This guy isn't some rotten fish or shrimp. He's the god king of the North God race, and his title is Destruction. Yi Zichen licked his lips and transmitted back. Yang Jian and the great sage froze, while Su Luer arched her brows in surprise. The god king of destruction? Yale's 10 over-gods glared at them like tigers watching their prey. 10 auras on par with the god, Yao, and demon emperors surrounded Yi Zichen and the others. It seemed they were trapped, but they didn't care too much. Yi Zichen and the others had already anticipated this situation. At the end of the day, this was Yale's territory. Keeping them here would be a piece of cake. The God King of Destruction, Star-Lord Yi, their gazes met. Yi Zichen's gaze was solemn, but Yale's eyes lit up with a hint of a smile. It was just as he'd said from the very beginning. They wanted to leave, but they couldn't. He hadn't set up any inescapable trap for Yi Zichen's group. Just the 10 over-gods under his command were more than enough to keep Yi Zichen and the others in the outside god realm for all eternity. Lord Yale, my people have already met up with me. I presume there's no need to continue this friendly competition you spoke of. In that case, shouldn't you keep your word and let me take my people back to the Third Era? Star-Lord Yi, you don't want to stay here as a guest? The god race is great, and Lord Yale is very hospitable. Forgive me for not wanting to stay here any longer. That's quite a pity. Yale chuckled. In truth, Star-Lord Yi could have left with your people, and I wouldn't force you to stay. I've always been a man of my word, but... He waved his hand, and a man covered in wounds appeared behind Yale. He had a long scar over his left eye. When they looked closely, they saw that this was the god of pain Yale had sent to bring Xiao Yumei and the others back. Look, Yale pointed at the god of pain's face, then at his arm, which was still dripping with golden blood. I clearly agreed to bring your people here, but Star-Lord Yi set up an ambush in secret and injured them so badly. Isn't that a bit too much? If I don't get justice for him, how can I convince the masses in the future? God King of Destruction, I don't quite understand what you're saying. Yi Zichen furrowed his brows. I presume you've been keeping an eye on our movements ever since we entered the outside. There's no way you didn't know exactly how many people came to visit. From start to finish, my people were right under your nose. How could they possibly injure the god of pain? Chapter 1755. Dong. Monkey, watch out. Up in the sky, Yang Jian transformed into a black mist and appeared in front of the great sage. He swung his three-pointed, double-edged sword 180 degrees, and the silver light collided with the golden patterns that were surging toward him with a deafening boom. After neutralizing the golden patterns, Yang Jian looked back to see the great sage heading straight for the realm of destruction. Ice wall. As Su Lu spoke, a wall of ice appeared in front of the great sage. The great sage stopped. Su Lu Xiao Yumei, and Su Yin landed in front of him. What are you doing? Don't go. Given our cultivation, there's no way we can break through this barrier. Su Lu's icy blue eyes stared ahead. 100 meters in front of them was the realm of destruction where Yale and his overgods were. There wasn't anything special about the outer region, but as soon as they got close, the destructive power of destruction completely annihilated their attacks. Both the great sage and Yang Jian had tried many times, but to no avail. As for Yi Zichen, he was inside, facing off against Yale and the other overgods. But Yi Zi and the benefactor who saved us are still inside. There's nothing we can do about it. Besides, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Countless swords whistled through the air like a rain of swords. Yin Shang and the others' gazes froze. Su Lu looked indifferently at the dense mass of figures before them. Our situation here isn't any better. The realm of destruction. Yi Zichen stood in the center with Su Yiyun in his arms. Around him were Yale's 10 overgods. Although the situation was dire, all Yi Zichen did was treat Su Yiyun's injuries. He kept feeding him precious pills. At the same time, he understood everything. Injuring himself to gain sympathy. Yale had put on an act. The god of pain was no longer in his previous wretched state, although he was still injured. Perhaps Su Yiyun had hurt him, but not as badly as he'd expected. This was all part of Yale's plan. The more he thought about it, the more resentment Yi Zichen felt. The god of pain had clearly only suffered some superficial wounds, but Yale and the others had injured Su Yiyun so badly. Yale, it was all because of him. Star-Lord Yi, why are you looking at me like that? Yale hovered high in the sky and looked down at Yi Zichen. His brows arched as if he were toying with Yi Zichen. I invited you here as a guest. I never thought of fighting against you. It was like that in the beginning, and it's still like that now. Yi Zichen smiled indifferently, then glanced at the great sage and the others, who were still caught up in the maelstrom. Yale obviously noticed the look in his eyes and smiled. I had no choice but to do this. The person in your arms is an enemy of the outer realm, so I should be the one to deal with it. But you overstepped your authority and deliberately wanted to get involved in this matter. Naturally, I can only treat you as his accomplice. As long as you hand him over to me, I can swear to heaven and earth. I will let you and your men leave, and I will not stop you. The wind suddenly became stronger than before. The howling winds caused Yi Zichen's clothes to flap wildly, and the clouds in the sky slowly drifted in the direction the wind blew. Yi Zichen looked up with an indiscernible smile, but said nothing. Instead, he slowly rose to his feet. The surrounding overgods followed his example and prepared for battle. Yale narrowed his eyes. Star-Lord Yi, you're determined to persist in your errors. Suddenly, Yi Zichen touched his left eye. The blindfold that had been sealing his left eye fell off, and the purple starlight that belonged to the Emperor's star dripped down from his eye like a tear. As he fell through the air, the tear condensed from starlight transformed into threads that wrapped tightly around Su Yiyun and Yi Zichen's back. Yi Zichen's left hand glowed with golden light. A long sword shining with golden light fell into his hand. The moment he held the sword, his aura became much stronger than before. Yiyun, I'll take you out of here. As soon as he said that, Yi Zichen's gaze narrowed. He gripped the Xianyuan sword tightly and attacked the overgods. My esteemed guest, Star-Lord Yi, has lost control of his emotions. Help me calm him down. Up in the sky, Yale roared. The 10 overgods beneath him instantly charged towards Yi Zichen. Shouted the maidservant outside the divine palace. The goddess of war clenched her fists so tightly that her fingernails dug into her palms. Golden blood dripped from her palms. Big sister, your hand. The maidservant's gaze froze, and she hurriedly took out a handkerchief to bandage her wound. However, the goddess of war clenched her fists tightly and bit down on her lips. She really wanted to go over. Ever since Yale attacked Yizichin and the others, this thought had been lingering in the goddess of war's sea of consciousness for a long time. But reason told her that even if she went over now, it would be no use. If she went over now, she'd be making an enemy out of Yale. She might as well wait until Yizichin and the others were defeated and Yale wanted to execute them. Then, she could speak up for them and perhaps spare their lives. All she could do was endure until the end. Scram! With the Xianyuan sword in hand, Yizichin was like a god of slaughter. Every time he swung his sword, the devil Dharma body behind him copied his movements and smashed into the surrounding overgods. He had the devil Dharma body, the Xianyuan sword, and the radiance of the Emperor's star. For a moment, he didn't fall into a disadvantageous position despite being surrounded by the overgods. Yale, who stood proudly in the sky, wasn't just there to watch the show. He hadn't immediately suppressed Yizichin because he sensed something strange about his devil Dharma body. As Yizichin fought the overgods, he'd been paying close attention to Yizichin's flaws. As for that flaw, after observing for so long, he'd finally found it. Rather than saying it was Yizichin's flaw, it was more accurate to say it was his burden. That flaw was annihilate. Yale tossed out a small black hole-like sphere. Shockingly, it headed straight for Su Yiyun, who stood behind Yizichin. Although Yizichin was fighting the overgods, his attention had never left Su Yiyun. As soon as Yale released the black sphere, Yizichin snorted coldly. His wings instantly unfurled and enveloped him and Su Yiyun. Boom! The black sphere landed on the devil Dharma body's wings, shattering one of them. Yizichin, who was the core of the devil Dharma body, coughed up a mouthful of blood. Star-Lord Yi, you've lost. At that moment, Yale suddenly landed and shook his head regretfully. When Yizichin heard this, he wiped the blood from the corners of his mouth and smiled bitterly. I lost. Yizichin admitted that Yale's attack had seriously injured him, but if he said he'd lost now, you really have lost. Yale's expression was still as regretful as ever. Star-Lord Yi, have you not noticed? There are only 10 overgods here, but 11 should be here. As soon as he said this, Yizichin, who'd been about to mock Yale for his arrogance, suddenly froze. He turned to look at Su Yiyun, only to discover that Su Yiyun, who'd looked like he was on the verge of death, was now smiling at him. Furthermore, his right hand flickered with purple flames. Chapter 1756. If you want to pin a crime on someone, you can always find a pretext. There are countless ways to force Yizichin and the others to stay, but using the ruse of self-injury to gain their confidence was far too low level. What level was the master god of pain at? The minister of the right, who focused on martial arts, had less than a 50% chance of victory against these sovereigns. Who else could injure him to such an extent? Could it be the 3 emperors of the god, Yao, and demon races? They'd been by Yizichin's side since the First Era, yet Yale insisted on saying they were his subordinates. No. Suddenly, Yizichin's expression froze. Who said the outsiders were all by his side? Emperor Hades, Su Yiyun, wasn't with them. It was just that Yizichin had always viewed him as a brother, not a subordinate. That was why he despised him when Yale said his subordinate had injured the god of pain. If it really was Su Yiyun, it wasn't impossible. One had to know that any underworld emperor's cultivation level was infinitely close to that of the 3 emperors. It was even possible that the underworld emperor's cultivation level was higher than the 3 emperors. Yizichin's expression didn't look too good, but Yale didn't get angry at his scolding. She looked at the change in his expression with interest and immediately pulled the corners of her mouth into a smile. It seems that this king has wronged Star-Lord Yi. Just now, this king caught a severely injured person and thought that he was Star-Lord Yi's subordinate. Since Star-Lord Yi has spoken to this extent, I believe you. Then please take your people and leave. When he heard that, Yizichin's pupils contracted violently. There was no need to think too much about it. Yizichin already knew who the person Yale had captured was. It was definitely Su Iyun. Furthermore, he was the only one who had the ability to heavily injure the master god of pain and rescue Xiao Yumei and the others. Who is that person? What? Star-Lord Yi is interested in him? Yale pursed his lips into a smile and lightly clapped his hands. Before long, one of the over-gods under Yale appeared before everyone with a black-robed, bloodied young man with disheveled hair and a drooping head. When they saw him, Yang Jian and the great sage's pupils constricted. The only reason they were like this was because this person was the one who had saved them from their lover. However, this person had been wearing a mask all this time, and his moves were very strange. Neither of them had recognized this person's true identity. However, the great sage and the others would never mistake his black robe for someone else. Yi Zichen clenched his right hand tightly, and his chest heaved violently. He couldn't be mistaken. The black-robed youth in front of him, who had been beaten to the brink of death, was his best friend since university. The current Emperor Mingyi, Su Iyun. This is me. Let him go. What does Star-Lord you mean by this? Yale frowned slightly, and a hint of anger flashed across his face. Star-Lord has already clearly said that he's not one of your people, yet you still want to interfere in this matter. Furthermore, you're ordering me around. Don't you think you've overstepped your boundaries? I told you to let him go. Rumble, thunder from the ninth heaven. As Yi Zichen spoke, a turbulent aura swept out of his body. The sky, which was covered with snow and ice, was instantly covered by dark clouds. The dark clouds looked gloomy, as if a thunderstorm was about to fall. Crimson thunderstorms roared between the clouds, as if they were about to destroy the world. Flames raged on Yi Zichen's body, and the rising steam was dyed blood red. As soon as the steam appeared, the surrounding ice storm froze it. It transformed into countless red ice crystals, which fell to the ground like hail. The blood-red mist was Yi Zichen's murderous aura. Yi Zichen didn't devour or kill. Even in a war-torn world like the gods, Yao, and demons, he still cherished and revered life as an ordinary person in the modern realm. He absolutely wouldn't kill the innocent, so he naturally didn't have any murderous aura on him. But now, raging murderous aura surged out of his body like a tidal wave. In the blink of an eye, everything within 100 miles was dyed crimson. Standing behind him were Xiao Yumei, Su Yin, and Su Lu. Everyone who knew him and knew his personality couldn't help but stare wide-eyed. They stared at Yi Zichen, who was like a giant beast from the abyss, and their eyes were filled with unfamiliarity. Was this man with such overwhelming murderous aura really the Yi Zichen they once knew? The blood-red murderous aura grew stronger and stronger. Ripples appeared in the sky above the god realm, following the waves of murderous aura and rushing towards Yale and his overgods. The goddess of war and her handmaidens hadn't left since the explosion of the Lover's Bend. They watched everything unfold intently. Yi Zichen's murderous aura had already enveloped them. The handmaidens, who'd never seen blood before, were terrified. They licked their lips and looked at the goddess of war. Big sister. She was terrified. She'd been born into the god realm. Although her parents were ordinary people at the bottom of the hierarchy, outsiders didn't dare harbor any ill intentions against them. She'd never experienced war, but she'd luckily been chosen by the goddess of war and became her personal handmaiden. Later, she was placed by Yale's side as a spy. It was fair to say that in the 100 years since she'd been born, she'd practically never seen the blood of a living person. Yi Zichen's murderous aura felt like a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. It was the aura of someone who'd truly killed someone. The handmaidens had never experienced anything like this before. Their legs trembled involuntarily. Especially now that Yale and Yi Zichen were at loggerheads, she was truly worried that they'd start fighting. Big sister, what should we do now? The handmaidens rubbed their hands, their eyes brimming with anxiety. Little did they know, the goddess of war was just as worried as they were. How could this be? Muttered the goddess of war to herself. She looked at Yi Zichen, who was completely enraged like an agitated lion. Her brows furrowed with anxiety. There's no way yours match. Since he told you to leave, Why don't you? Others might not know Yale's methods, but the goddess of war knew them all too well. Even in her perfect form, at her peak, she couldn't last more than 100 rounds against Yale. And that was assuming he didn't use the profound truths of destruction. If he used them, you're such an idiot. Outside, the goddess of war was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. Inside, Yi Zichen's fury had reached a boiling point. He glared viciously at Yale, his right eye bloodshot. Let him go. Chapter 1757. To the north of the Divine Palace, it was hard to imagine how many outsiders there were. Countless experts flew through the air, burning the power of their godheads, as if they'd cast aside their own lives and entered the range of the breath of ice. Even with Su Lu Er's breath of ice keeping them in check, the great sage and the others couldn't help but feel their scalps go numb when they saw so many enemies swarming in. Kids kill. In the face of so many outsider experts, Yi Zichen's subordinates had no chance of victory at all. The great sage grabbed several fistfuls of monkey hair, then blew out tens of thousands of monkeys to fight the outsider experts. Yang Jian even used a technique he hadn't used in tens of thousands of years, transforming beings into soldiers and summoning countless heavenly soldiers. Although they couldn't compare to the outsider experts at all, they could at least relieve some of the pressure on the great sage and the others. Lu Er, increase the intensity of your breath of ice. Only the great sage had the guts to call Su Lu. The Rui Jingu Bang in his hand continuously landed on the bodies of the alien experts. The intense battle also caused him to pant uncontrollably. There was some fatigue in his eyes. I don't need you to tell me that. As soon as he spoke, the surrounding breath of ice surged even more violently than before. By now, Su Lu Er's hair had turned the color of ice crystals. Her eyes narrowed into slits as she activated her breath of ice to its strongest state. By her side, Suyin didn't care about her divine power consumption in the slightest. Her breath of recovery buoyed the experts fighting at the front. So long as they were injured in the slightest, it would instantly heal their wounds. Oh well, Yang, how many have you killed? The great sage took care of yet another outsider expert with a single swing of his staff. He panted heavily at the shadowy figure of Yang Jian. His Rui Jingu Bang had long since been soaked in golden blood. When he straightened it, golden blood dripped from the surface. I lost count, replied Yang Jian, panting. Suddenly, the space behind the great sage warped, and a sinister-looking old man emerged from the warped space. Monkey behind you. Before Yang Jian could even speak, the great sage sensed danger behind him. He swung his long rod behind him, but to his surprise, the rod that he had intended to send the old man flying didn't appear. Instead, the rod was grabbed by someone. Suddenly, the great sage turned around and saw a black-robed man with a blurry face grabbing his staff. Oh, I almost got injured by accident. The black-robed man loosened his grip on the staff and swung it around. When the great sage saw him, his eyes widened. What about me? The black-robed man waved his hand and laughed. Don't mind it too much. I don't blame you. But don't be careless at this time. The people of the Outer Realm God race aren't mediocre. No, why are you here? Why can't I be here? The black-robed man was stunned for a moment. After I let you out, I was targeted by the Overgod here. I've been on the run all this time. Just now, I sensed the commotion of a battle, so I came over to take a look. No, the great sage's lips quivered, but no words came out. He stared at the black-robed man for a long time. At this moment, Yang Jian also rushed over. When he saw the black-robed man, he also revealed a shocked expression. What's going on with you guys? The black-robed man's tone was filled with confusion. Yang Jian shouted, Why are you here? Who's that with Yi? As soon as he said that, the black-robed man, the great sage, and Yang Jian's expressions froze. They looked in the direction of Yale's domain of destruction and just happened to see. Splurt. Yi Zichen coughed up a mouthful of bright red blood with a hint of gold. He clutched his chest and knelt on the ground. Su Yun, who he'd been carrying on his back, also separated from him and landed beside Yale. Master, well done, Thousand Faces. Su Yun knelt on one knee in front of Yale. Yale smiled and nodded in satisfaction. Yizichin knelt on the ground, his eyes filled with unwillingness. He saw Su Iyun, who'd just been heavily injured and on the verge of death, gradually transform into someone else. A fake. This person wasn't Su Iyun. Yizichin had considered that the overgod of pain's injuries were a ruse, and he'd also considered the fact that no one was watching over Su Iyun. Danger awaited him here. The only thing he hadn't considered was that Su Iyun was also a fake. If Su Iyun were still conscious, Yizichin absolutely wouldn't have fallen for such a low-level scheme. It was precisely because Su Iyun was so badly injured that Yizichin was so worried about his survival. Cough. No matter how much he'd calculated, he'd still fallen for Yale's trap, and such a low-level one at that. When he considered this, Yizichin's heart burned with fury. He coughed up another mouthful of blood, and even more blood flowed from his wounds. Star-Lord Yi, your injuries are too severe. Do you want me to send someone to treat you? Yale chuckled as he descended from the sky and slowly walked over. Yizichin's devil dharma body was strange, so Yale didn't want to put himself in danger. Of course, if he wanted to, he could still forcefully break Yizichin's strange devil dharma body. However, if there was an easier way, why not use it? As the third era's master of the stars, Yizichin was Yale's greatest obstacle in his future plans to destroy the third era. Yale had begun gathering information on Yizichin a few years ago. Whether it was his temperament or his complicated relationships, Yale knew them all by heart. In summary, Yale had found Yizichin's weakness, his most fatal weakness. It was, he valued relationships too much. Normally, Yizichin could remain absolutely calm, and he could clearly analyze any problem. However, when his friends and family were in danger, he became impulsive. The closer someone was to him, the more impulsive he became. Su Iyun, the new emperor of the River Styx, was Yizichin's best friend. As soon as Su Iyun entered the outside, he entered Yale's line of sight. He also knew that Yizichin knew that Su Iyun had also entered the outside. Yale had deliberately ordered Su Iyun to release the Great Sage and the others he'd captured earlier, then set up a trap for Yizichin to fall into. He thought it'd take more effort to lure Yizichin into this low-level trap, but it went so smoothly. Yizichin's chest was pierced through. Starlight and divine power flowed outwards, and the demonic Dharma body behind him gradually dissipated without the support of spiritual energy. Yizichin knelt on the ground, all by himself. Under Yale's gaze, he couldn't resist in the slightest. In truth, this or a blood loss could easily knock someone unconscious, but the pain in his chest kept Yizichin awake. He looked silently at Yale and saw the smile on his face. Your Excellency, this feast at Hongmin, you've truly planned it meticulously, said Yizichin. If this can make Star-Lord Yi feel better, you can think of it this way. But in truth, this is nothing more than a sudden thought. Yale smiled calmly. Star-Lord Yi, there's no need to worry. I won't kill you. The letter made it clear. I'm just. If you want to stay here as a guest, all you have to do is stay until the end of the third era. Ha! Ha ha ha! Yizichin threw his head back and laughed. But as he laughed, blood leaked from his mouth. Stay as a guest until the end of the third era? Your Excellency, forgive me, but I cannot agree. Chapter 1758. The blood-colored rage condensed under the ice breath, falling from the sky like a blood-colored hail. Yizichin, who was in a stalemate, could no longer contain his anger, especially when he saw that Su Iyun hadn't struggled at all from start to finish. He hadn't even moved a finger. It was as if fuel had been poured into his heart, and it burned even more fiercely. The goddess of war, who was watching this scene, was stunned. What did Yizichin just say? Was he threatening Yale? Why was he being so irrational? Who was Yale? He was the divine king of the northern god tribe, the divine king of destruction. Never mind people like Yizichin and the others from the lower realms. Not even god kings of the same level as him would dare utter such treasonous threats. Is he a fool? The war goddess was so angry that her hands were shaking. She clenched her fists and stared at them. She was very worried, but she didn't rush over. Or rather, now was not the time for her to appear. The maid had long since been scared out of her wits. No matter how shocking Yi Zichen's words were, she wasn't surprised at all. In her opinion, this might be the saying, "The ignorant are fearless." How dare you? Impudent. Yale's overgods were similarly shocked, but they quickly leapt to their feet and pointed angrily at Yi Zichen's face. At the same time, the great sage and the others also took a step forward. His divine power was madly channeled, and the power of the stars streaked across the sky. Before they truly started fighting, both sides had already tested each other with their divine powers, causing the pressure here to be so heavy that anyone who was not of the arch would definitely explode and die. The storm generated by the collision turned this place into a vacuum. Yes, it was at this moment that the Outerium god race and Ji Yuan were at daggers drawn. In truth, considering the pros and cons, Yi Zichen's decision to leave was the most advantageous for them. Unfortunately, Yi Zichen valued relationships too much. Sui Yun's relationship with him was too strong. Yi Zichen couldn't just ignore him. When he saw that he was almost dead, his emotions reached a boiling point. He was hysterical and irrational. Yi Zichen's team needed someone with a clear head to analyze the situation for them. But Sui Yun was the great sage and Yang Jian's savior. Seeing their benefactor in trouble, of course they couldn't just stand by and watch. As for Yin Shang and Go Yuzhan, they had already vaguely sensed the true identity of the person bathed in blood. Literati star. As for stars, they naturally would not leave him here. Since they both had irrational reasons, they might as well make a big fuss. Release him. The abyss's devilish murmurs reverberated in everyone's ears. Only then did they notice that the illusory image of a demon had appeared behind Yi Zichen. Devil's Dharmakaya. Pilar's eyes narrowed. Others might not be able to tell, but as the fiend king of the fiend race, there was no way he wouldn't be able to tell. Although Yi Zichen's devil dharma body hadn't fully condensed yet, the few illusory images he released were enough for Pilar to recognize his true appearance. How could he possibly condense it? Pilar's heart was filled with horror. Yi Zichen had stolen the devil dharma body from him. Although he was infuriated that Yi Zichen had stolen his demonic scriptures, he knew that even if Yi Zichen stole them, he wouldn't be able to cultivate them. The first condition to condense a devil's dharmakaya was the abyss devil race's bloodline. Yi Zichen was clearly a demon, Yao and God. Even demons couldn't meet the requirements of a fiend's bloodline. In Pilar's eyes, it was not a big deal to snatch the secret manual. But he'd actually succeeded. He'd actually found all the materials he needed to forge a devil dharma body, and he'd condensed it. Could it be that this person had some sort of connection to the demons? Oh, a devil dharma body. Among them, one of them recognized the illusory image behind Yi Zichen. It was Yale. In truth, the ones who understood him best were his enemies. The demons and gods shared a border, and there was constant friction between them. The gods naturally knew a great deal about the demons, and Yale was their leader. As soon as Yi Zichen's illusory image appeared, Yale was certain it was the devil dharma body. How interesting. The secret of the Fiend clan was actually passed on by Pilar to an outsider. It seems the demons really have no chance of turning the tables. That's why he had no choice but to cooperate with outsiders. Yale narrowed his eyes and chuckled to himself. It had to be said that the demons were on the same level as the gods. When the devil dharma body appeared, Yale's subordinates sensed a familiar pressure. This was something they'd never sensed from Yi Zichen before. As the illusory devil dharma body gradually condensed, Yi Zichen's aura grew stronger and stronger, and his demonic aura stirred up more and more terrifying storms. Gradually, countless tornadoes appeared around them. The raging tempest caused Yang Jian and the Outlander overgods to retreat uncontrollably. Yo was still smiling as he spoke. Star-Lord Yi, why are you so angry? Let him go. Star-Lord Yi, this is the outside's business. You've been threatening me all this time, trying to force me to let him go. I've lost a lot of face. If you don't let him go, you'll die. Just because of your devil dharma body? Yale's gaze was filled with indescribable disdain. Try me and you'll know. With that, Yi Zichen shot forward like an explosive cannonball. Red light streaked across the sky, leaving a perfect arc in the air. Then he slammed his palm down viciously on Yale. The devil Dharma body was the foundation of the demon race. Up until now, the demons had relied on the devil Dharma body to maintain the balance of power. In order to break that balance, Yale had studied the devil Dharma body for 1,000 years. Even now, if he said his understanding of the devil Dharma body was second, no one on the outside would dare claim to be first. When it came to devil Dharma bodies, who could compare to a devil king like Pilar? However, Yi Zichen was the one who'd told the other god kings about the devil Dharma body's weaknesses. Yi Zichen was but a beginner. In Yale's eyes, the devil Dharma body was nothing more than a toy. If he really wanted to break the balance of power with the devil Dharma body, then that was ridiculous. Yi Zichen was right in front of him. It looked like Yi Zichen was about to succeed, but in truth, if Yale wanted to, he could easily dodge. However, he didn't. He wanted to use reality to tell Yi Zichen that the devil Dharma body he relied on was nothing in front of him. With a devil Dharma body like that, a single slap from him, cough! Golden blood flowed down Yale's arm. His hand was still in the same position as before, but the image of Yi Zichen being sent flying didn't appear. Instead, his arm. A corroded handprint appeared. At the same time, the gods by Yale's side, Yang Jian and the others by Yi Zichen's side, and the war goddess, who'd been watching the entire time, were all stunned. Chapter 1759. A pitch-black tower suddenly appeared, glowing with light. As soon as it appeared, a heavy, oppressive aura washed over them. The howling winds made it impossible for the surrounding over-gods to look directly at it. Dense clouds emanated from the tower. All of a sudden, two blurry shadows appeared in the clouds. As soon as they appeared, hearty, boorish laughter rang out. "Brat, you haven't even paid me my wages yet, and now you want me to do your hard labor?" Yi Zichen finally relaxed at the familiar, wild tone. Naturally, this was the Yao Ceiling Pagoda's Tsang Xiong speaking to him like this. "I'll make it up to you once we get back." "Fine, I'll trust you this one time." The hearty laughter lingered for a long time. Yale narrowed his eyes and tried to peer inside. What surprised him was that the clouds and mist released by the tower were very strange. Despite his current cultivation, he couldn't even extend his divine sense inside. As soon as he touched the clouds, he felt an invisible force crush his divine sense. Even with divine power in his eyes, he couldn't see through the clouds with his naked eye. All he could see were two people standing within the clouds. If nothing unexpected happened, they were Yi Zichen's final trump card. At that moment, beneath the hazy clouds, scarlet light flared, and the surrounding temperature skyrocketed. The over-gods felt like they'd been thrown into a furnace. Sweat poured down their faces like rain. Yale's ear-piercing cry caused the space of destruction around him to tremble violently. The over-gods instinctively used the power of their godheads to seal off their hearing. Gradually, the light from the fire dimmed and turned into a faint red shadow under the cover of the clouds. "There's someone else." Yale's expression froze. When Qing Lan and Tsang Xiong appeared, they hadn't released any auras, so he couldn't directly determine their cultivation levels. But the flames just now were different. They were oppressive and scorching, as if they wanted to incinerate the heavens and the earth. Throughout the entire god realm, he couldn't find anything that could compare to this kind of pure heat. The waves of heat they just released were no different from the perpetually burning sun. "You're here too." When he saw the flames, Yi Zichen immediately understood the newcomer's identity. Of the three demon emperors in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda, the three-legged golden crow had the worst relationship with him. Who would have thought that he would disregard the conflict between the two of them and lend a helping hand at such a time? Useless brat. The three-legged golden crow's tone was as cold as ever. He glanced emotionlessly at Yi Zichen. "If you're going to die, why don't you choose a good place to die? Don't you think you're embarrassing the epic by dying in the barbarian race's territory? You're not afraid of losing face, but I'm afraid of losing face." Yi Zichen couldn't detect even the slightest hint of emotion in his reply, but he didn't feel any reluctance. All he felt was gratitude. The three-legged golden crow's words were rather domineering as well. He was the only one who dared to say something like that, even in front of so many over-gods and godly monarchs. Just spit it out. I really don't know how Yale and the others will react when they hear this, but before Yale and the others could get angry, Song Xiong was already unhappy. Hey, Firebird, can you talk? What? Big brother Qinglan and I are from this place as well. Your King bringing us in as well. Oh, is that so? The three-legged golden crow nodded. Senior Lan isn't one of us. As for you, was I wrong to say you're a barbarian? You? Song Xiong was furious. Without even thinking about it, he reached out and grabbed the three-legged golden crow. Unfortunately, there was no way Qinglan would let him run amok. Song Xiong could only gnash his teeth in hatred and glare at the three-legged golden crow. Just now, Song Xiong and the others had actually called him and Qinglan from the outside realm. How are you? Can you hold on? Qinglan stopped Song Xiong and the three-legged golden crow's bickering, then landed in front of Yi Zichen and examined his injuries. I'm fine. I didn't hurt any vital parts. That's for the best. Focus on healing and leave this place to the three of us. But don't get your hopes up. No matter what, this is a godly monarch. We're not completely confident in our ability to get you out of here. Hey kid, did you hear what Big Brother Qinglan said? The mission is extremely difficult, so we need to pay you at least 10 times as much, said Song Xiong with a chuckle. If we make it out of here, I'll let you drink as much peach juice as you want. You said it. I said it. Yi Zichen nodded firmly, then turned to Qinglan. Uncle Lan, I'll have to trouble you. If we really can't win, you can just return to the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. I'll do my best. Yi Zichen nodded solemnly. Song Xiong, on the other hand, twisted his arms back and forth as if he were stretching. His large eyes swept over the lords and Yale. Qinglan also turned around at this moment. The moment he turned around, the gentleness on his face vanished into thin air. His entire body emanated a somber aura. His lips pressed together, and his eyes narrowed into slits. Let's go, Song Xiong. Let's go say hello to our old friends. Outside the clouds, Yale and the chief gods under him were all staring at the clouds in front of them. They could tell that the conversation between Qinglan and the others inside the clouds had not been heard by Yale and the others. Otherwise, when the three-legged golden crow mentioned that the god race was the barbarian race, it was impossible for them to not react. Since Qinglan and the others hadn't appeared yet, Yale and the others hadn't rashly entered. Master, the Lord of Rhythm knelt on one knee. Just now, he'd received Yale's orders to leave the domain of destruction. Now that he'd returned, he was clearly ready to report back. The elite aura-breaking beasts have all been driven here. They're at your disposal, Master. Outside the domain of destruction, the frost was still the same. However, there were now hundreds of illusory buildings, each the size of a building. When the great sage and the others saw this, their hearts trembled. They all recognized these creatures. They were the outsiders' unique aura-breaking beasts. At a rough estimate, there were more than 100 of them. They were heading in the direction of Yi Zichen's domain of destruction. Yi Yang Jian, the great sage, and Sui Yun's eyes were bloodshot. They threw caution to the wind and killed the aura-breaking beasts. They couldn't enter the domain of destruction, but at the very least, they couldn't put Yi Zichen under even more pressure. At that moment, the space around the divine palace suddenly trembled violently. Everyone saw an enormous shadow appear, blotting out the sky. As soon as it appeared, it vanished in a blur. It grabbed 2 of the aura-breaking beasts in the sky, then tossed them into its mouth and bit them to pieces. At the same time, Yale's annihilation space was smashed apart by this enormous shadow. The sovereigns all hurriedly retreated, but Yale remained standing there, his eyes shining as he stared forward. It's you. It's me. Chapter 1761. The battle outside the divine palace hadn't stopped. The giant figure's appearance only gave the great sage and the others a moment to catch their breath. Afterwards, the god race experts continued their onslaught. No matter how terrifying the giant figure was, they only had one mission in mind: capture all of the enemies. As for the giant figure, they knew full well that they didn't need to worry about it. The God King of Destruction would deal with it on his own. Stop them. When they saw Ezichin's injuries, the great sage and the others' eyes reddened. However, they knew full well that they had the god of life with them. So long as Ezichin could get Suyan's help, he'd be fine. What they needed to do was to block these hindrances from the Outer Realm God clan. They'd never spoken to each other before, but now they'd reached some sort of tacit understanding. Su Yan didn't slow down at all. He carried Ezichin to Su Yan in the shortest time possible, then left the pursuers to the great sage and the others. Lilian, hurry. Ezichin's aura was already growing weak. Su Yan knit his brows and placed Ezichin in front of Su Yan, his eyes brimming with urgency. In his desperation, he hadn't even noticed how he'd addressed Su Yan. If this was any other time, Su Yan would have noticed the way Su Yan addressed her. However, the situation was dire. Ezichin's chest had been pierced through, and all his blood vessels had been severed. Even though Su Yan had sealed his blood vessels along the way, fresh blood continued to gush out of him. I'll seal his wound with ice first. With that, Su Luer's hand brushed past Ezichin's chest. The terrifying hole in his chest was covered in a layer of ice. Although the ice had no effect on Ezichin's injuries, it could at least prevent him from losing too much blood. At the same time, Su Yan's emerald light flared. She placed her hands on Ezichin's chest, her gaze solemn, and poured the purest life energy into him. "You're a dog." Yale's words were ear-piercing, and he looked at Qing Lan mockingly. He didn't think there was anything wrong with what he'd said. That pagoda had obviously sealed someone else's soul and left an imprint on it to enslave them for life. Yale had indeed sensed the existence of such a mark in Qing Lan's body. Ezichin summoned Qing Lan as well. From the looks of it, he was just another person's dog, the kind of dog whose master told him to live or die. He had no right to choose at all. Yale boy. Song Xiong's deafening roar shook everyone's hearts. The gratification that Yale had shown in his eyes earlier on was replaced by indifference. The 10 overgods flew into the void and landed behind Yale. Faced with Yale's mockery, Qing Lan stroked the fur on Song Xiong's neck good-naturedly. "Brother Qing Lan, it's no big deal. Besides, Divine King Yale is right." Qing Lan smiled gently. "It looks like the pride of our northern god clan, the former Sword Shadow, follows the wind, has experienced a lot in recent years. He's much less spirited than before." Yale still had a mocking expression on his face as he said, "That's right. It's necessary to be docile when you're a dog. Otherwise, if your master isn't happy, you'll lose your life just like that." "Yale, you're still as talkative as ever." Qing Lan didn't seem to be angered, but his eyes sunk the moment his words left his mouth. A storm sprang up in the sky. The howling winds caused Qing Lan's green robes to flap wildly, and the strand of white hair on his forehead danced wildly in the wind. "I wonder if your skills have improved at all." "Hey, the Sword Shadow follows the wind is furious." Yale's mockery didn't diminish. He used the most frivolous of words to attack Qing Lan. To tell the truth, this was the first time the overgods had seen Yale act like this, even though they'd been by his side for so long. In the past, their divine king had always been a man of few words. No matter who he faced in the god realm, he was always cold and distant. It was as if his only goal was to destroy. However, from the epic lord's visit to this Qing Lan, who their divine king had described as the pride of the Qing clan, the one who'd received countless honors, the Sword Shadow follows the wind, they couldn't help but wonder if this person really was their divine king. Even they couldn't be bothered to use such low-level taunts. What they didn't know was that Yale wasn't just taunting them with words. He was also using an exaggerated expression to express his disdain. Not only that, but he'd also dragged the overgods into it. "It's your blessing to be able to feel the sword shadow follows the wind's fury. You must remember this feeling, understand?" Yes, it was very low level, but the overgods didn't dare not respond. "How much longer do you want to talk trash?" "Yale, you're already a god king now," Qing Lan said in a serious tone. "You don't have to worry about that. I'd just like to see you angry." Yale's smile gradually faded. He gently waved his hand at the storm around Qing Lan. In an instant, the space where he waved his hand collapsed, and the surrounding storm was completely annihilated. How could such a low-level wind live up to your name? Sword's shadow follows the wind. Even if it's just gathering power, it's still a little too low for me. Since I've come to take revenge, you should at least let me see something that excites me. Where's your godhead? That's the most special godhead in the history of the god race. Shouldn't you bring out your other divine sparks for my sovereigns to see? Special godheads. The surrounding overgods were stunned. The godheads in the god race were naturally different, but they were all pure gold in color. The god race had been born for several eras. After such a long time, it was only natural that special godheads would be born. As for this special godhead, it referred to the special color. The life goddess godhead didn't count. Its dark green color was due to the color of vitality. What was truly special was that it was born with other colors. In the entire god race, there were only 3 special godheads. One of them had died long ago in the ancient era. The other special godhead was the current god emperor. The god king of destruction had just said that this person's godhead was special, and the most special. Understood. Qinglan ignored the over-god's burning gazes. She smiled and nodded. A former loser indeed needs some qualifications to challenge again. Moreover, you're the god king of destruction now. Yil didn't comment. At this moment, the entire world darkened. This darkness wasn't because the world was covered. Instead, it was because something was emitting a black light, making the world seem dark. Chapter 1762. It shone like a black jewel. The rhombus-shaped divine spark released its own light, causing the world to pale in comparison. It really was a special divine spark. The overgods stared at Qinglan's divine spark, their eyes filled with shock. They hadn't expected there to be another special divine spark besides the God King. The great sage and the others also noticed the shadow released by the divine spark. When they saw the black divine spark, their eyelids twitched. A black divine spark. Yinshang fell into deep thought as he stared at Qinglan's divine spark. As the Emperor Star's left minister, he controlled everything in the world. Having received the former Star Lord of the left minister's inheritance, he had a good understanding of the divine sparks of the outer realm. Divine sparks were gold, representing holiness and glory. Outer realm divine sparks that could condense divine sparks were accompanied by a sacred attribute. Sacred attributes could make one's mind peaceful. Even violent people would be suppressed by the sacred attribute of divine sparks. As a result, the outer realm's angels and most of the other divine races were peaceful people. Yale walked the path of destruction and was known as the Destruction Overgod. He might be a rather special existence. The other sovereigns, such as the Sovereign of Pain, Sovereign of Rhythm, and the other sovereigns under his command, were actually not bloodthirsty people. If not for Yale's orders, or if someone really did endanger the outer realm divine race's safety, they definitely wouldn't bully the weak. Of course, gold represented holiness, while black represented evil. Yinshang deduced that someone who could condense a black divine spark had to be an evil person. But if he was evil, why couldn't he sense any evil aura from his divine spark? His divine spark structure was pure black, but it was as smooth as a black jewel. The light it released was also non-repulsive. Could it be that this black godhead wasn't born from his heart, but was born with him from the moment he was born? This, the left minister's Yinshang, was at a loss. All living things, be they human, Yao, or even demons, were the purest when they were born. A newborn child was like a piece of white paper. What they would become after they were carved depended on their surroundings. Moreover, he had been corroded by this kind of dark divine spark since he was born, and his reason had not been devoured until now. Moreover, it seemed that he had even cleansed this divine spark of evil. One had to know that this kind of darkness godhead could infinitely magnify the darkness in a person's heart until it devoured their conscience and turned them into a complete slave of the darkness godhead. How pure was this person's personality? Could it be that he had never had any negative emotions since he was born? Since that was the case, how did his darkness godhood appear? Look, what a splendid godhead! Yale opened his arms and shook his head with an exaggerated expression. Since ancient times, the god race has given birth to the only darkness godhood. The last time he had seen it was 10,000 years ago. During these 10,000 years, he would often think of the splendor of godhood. After 10,000 years, I didn't expect this godhead to be even more sparkling and translucent than before. The darkness godhead hovered above Qinglan's head, and its radiance gradually dimmed. When all the light was retracted into the godhead, the black gem became even more translucent than before. Beautiful, truly beautiful. This is what godhood should look like. Black should be the purest color of a godhead. Look at this godhead. It's like a black gem. This is a gift from the heavens. What condensed form of divine spark. It's nothing compared to this divine spark. Yale seemed to have gone crazy. He looked at Qinglan's godhead with infatuation and kept praising it. He waved his hands and feet, using especially exaggerated movements to express the admiration and envy in his heart. The other chief gods all felt that Yale had gone a bit too far. Special godheads were indeed something people cared about, but there was no need to exaggerate it so much. At this moment, Qinglan said something that made everyone's eyes widen. Huh, is it very satisfying to praise your own godhead? The chief gods were stunned. What did Qinglan just say? His own godhead. In this situation, wasn't he referring to their god King Yale? What did that mean? Wasn't Yale's godhead the destruction godhead? Why did Qinglan say that the darkness godhead was Yale's godhead to change fate? Because of the black godhead, Yinshang paid particular attention to the conversation between Yale and Qinglan. When Yinshang heard what Qinglan said, the words suddenly appeared in his mind, and he blurted it out. What did you say? The great sage and the others were by his side. Yinshang wasn't the only one who cared about the black godhead. Although Su Yan's godhead was turquoise, they knew that was because of the aura of life. Her godhead was still pure gold. Qinglan's godhead was obviously pitch black, so they couldn't help but pay attention to it. Godhead to change fate. Yinshang took a deep breath and looked around him. Perhaps the great sage and the others had stopped the experts of the outer realm from advancing, or perhaps the darkness godhead had made them stop and watch. As a result, their battle with the great sage and the others came to a temporary halt. After confirming that the outer realm experts had no intention of attacking, the great sage's monkeys and Yang Jin's magical arsenal magic were on high alert. Only then could he feel at ease and tell everyone what he knew. The Minister of the Left's inherited memories contain memories of the outer realm's godheads. You must all be curious why this godhead is black. It's a darkness godhead, a special godhead of the outer realm. This kind of godhood contains the darkest power. It can devour the rationality of the condenser and turn them into its slave, turning them into a brutal killing machine. Rumor has it that this godhead belongs to the darkness god king, the number one expert of the outer realm. However, the godhead doesn't admit to having such a filthy godhead, so the information was sealed. The previous Minister of the Left only learned of it when he snuck into the outer realm's divine palace. The previous Minister of the Left was really fierce, said Go Yuzhan, wide-eyed. The outer realm, and Ji Yuan were old rivals. The Minister of the Left's inheritance also contained memories of the divine palace. Through them, he knew just how heavily guarded the place was. Not only had the Minister of the Left gone in, but he'd even seen their hidden tome. Then what do you mean by Godhead to change fate? Is it the same as defying the heavens? Asked the great sage. More or less. It's just that Godhead to change fate is much simpler than defying the heavens, but it's also much crueler. Yinshang pursed his lips. The great sage and the others waited attentively for him to continue. After a long while, Chapter 1763. Above the palace, Qinglan looked at Yale with a smile. The pitch-black godhood was still spinning above his head. The people around him were also stunned by his words. This godhead used to belong to Yale. How was that possible? The god of destruction Yale had condensed a destruction godhead and believed in the power of destruction. The chief gods, as well as the entire outer realm celestial race, knew why Qinglan had said such a thing. Godhead to change fate. Suddenly, these four words appeared in the hearts of all the overgods at the same time. At the chief god level, They were considered to be in the upper echelons of the celestial race. Their level was enough to know secrets that ordinary celestials didn't. It was just that this was so cruel that the outer realm celestial race labeled it as a forbidden technique. Even though Yale was temperamental, the chief gods didn't believe that he would do such a thing. Moreover, one had to be at least at the chief god level to know about the godhead to change fate. Yale had a destruction godhead before becoming a chief god. If his godhead had been this black godhead and the destruction godhead had been Qing lands, how could he have known about this forbidden technique before becoming a chief god? How dare you? The darkness chief god was the first to stand up and scold. The God King has always been a destruction godhead. Don't you dare spout nonsense. The darkness chief god? Qing Lan chuckled and pointed at the godhead above her head when she saw the anger on his face. This godhead has a lot to do with your godhead. Can't you feel it? This was the darkness chief god's godhead back then. As a darkness elemental, I believe that your godhead should resonate with it. The darkness chief god didn't say anything, but his thoughts were mixed. Just as Qing Lan had said, when his godhead appeared, the darkness chief god's godhead had indeed reacted a little. However, this didn't prove that this godhead was Yale's. Actually, you don't have to do this. Looking at the chief god's angry faces, Qing Lan smiled. I don't mean anything else. No matter who this godhead belongs to, it has been fused with me for tens of thousands of years. After being nourished for so long, it belongs to me long ago. As he spoke, he looked at Yale. Speaking of which, I actually want to thank you, my old friend. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have truly comprehended the power of darkness, and I wouldn't have known that the power of darkness could be so fascinating. Captivated? Isn't it devoured? Yale asked. 10,000 years ago, I was swallowed by the darkness and lost myself. Now, the godhead above Qing Lan's head suddenly shone brightly, and the dazzling black light made people unable to look at it directly. However, the black light was suddenly retracted by the divine spark, and night had descended upon the world. The divine spark revolved around Qing Lan like a black gem. Soon after, black stripes continuously climbed up Qing Lan's neck, face, forehead, and arms. Not long after, hideous black stripes crawled all over his body. Without any warning, Qing Lan disappeared from Tsang Xiong's shoulder. A gust of wind swept past. Yale's eyes turned cold as he clenched his right fist and thrust it forward. Qing Lan, who had disappeared, just happened to appear here. However, he also extended his fist and punched out. Bang! Raging divine power surged and kicked up a gust of wind. The overgods around Yale were all knocked back several steps. At the same time, Tsang Xiong, in his true form, followed closely behind. His claws, which seemed capable of ripping the heavens apart, swung viciously at the overgods. The Divine King can deal with that guy. We'll deal with the big one. One of the overgods shouted angrily. The other overgods nodded and charged at Tsang Xiong. Qing Lan, let me warn you before you attack. Sneak attacks aren't a good habit. He retracted his fist and gently patted the dust on his clothes that had been stained by the howling wind. Didn't I learn all this from you? With that, Qing Lan transformed into multiple afterimages. Yale's smile faded, and his divine power surged, transforming into afterimages as well. Rumble, rumble, rumble. I can't see anything at all. The great sage and the others, who'd been fighting the most ferociously, were now free. They focused their attention on the fight between Yale and the others in the Divine Palace. However, their movements were too fast. Even the great sage and Yang Jian, who'd activated their eyes of fire and golden eye of heaven, couldn't see their movements clearly. Why do we stop in the middle of the fight? Go Yuzhan muttered as he scratched his head. He looked at the Outer Realm Protoss experts, but they didn't seem to have any intention of fighting either. All of them were focused on watching the fight between the Divine King and the Overgods. It's a good thing that they don't want to fight. Yin Shang also glanced at them. Coincidentally, one of them was looking him in the eye. To everyone's surprise, the Outer Realm Protoss actually nodded at him. He didn't seem like he wanted to fight to the death at all. What's going on? It looks like they're being forced. Right now, the Overgods and Divine Kings are all busy. Without their superiors keeping an eye on them, they can't be bothered to fight to the death with us. Besides, we've been fighting for so long with the life goddess breath of life. We haven't lost any members at all. How many of them have died? Inshang noticed the great sage's gaze and explained. As expected, when they looked at the Protoss experts, all they got was a friendly look. So you're saying they were just putting on an act? Yang Jian was utterly speechless. They were putting on an act, yet they fought so fiercely. I almost exhausted them to the point of collapse. Perhaps there were people keeping an eye on them, so they didn't dare slack off. Inshang nodded at the Protoss experts, then hurried over to Su Yin and the others. Su Yin was still focused on treating Yi Zichen's injuries. When they arrived, no one dared disturb her. They could only watch Su Yun, who'd been standing there the entire time. How are you? His life isn't in danger, but his injuries are rather serious. He'll need some time to recover, murmured Su Yun. You're done here? I think the fight over there looks pretty fierce. The God Race soldiers don't want to fight us. Is that so? There is no need to explain. Su Yun understood what was going on. That's good too. Every second counts. Once he wakes up, we'll kill our way out. I'm just afraid they won't be able to hold out for long. They're up against the God King of Destruction and 11 overgods. As soon as he finished speaking, do you really think you can hurt me? A thunderous roar thundered through the air. Everyone looked in the direction of the divine palace and saw Qing Lan spitting out blood and falling to the ground. Yale was laughing with his eyes wide open. In his hand was a bloody arm. Chapter 1764. Brother Qing Lan. Song Xiong's eyes turned bloodshot as he swung his huge bare paw forward. The bare paw tore through the sky, forcing the several overgods who were trembling to retreat. Using this opportunity, Song Xiong extended his paw and caught Qing Lan, who was falling backwards. At this moment, there were several bone-deep wounds on Qing Lan's body. Her left arm was even glistening with blood, and golden blood flowed down continuously. Yale! Song Xiong's eyes were bloodshot. Under Qing Lan's dark sky, they were like two glowing red lamps. With a soul-shaking roar, Song Xiong's bare paw swung towards Yale. Song Xiong, you're no match for him. Qing Lan shouted as he clutched his severed arm. However, he was still a little too late in stopping Song Xiong. Or rather, even if Song Xiong had stopped Yale from the start, even if he knew he couldn't hurt Yale at all, he would still have done what he did. Dying. The bare paw tore through the sky and fell. Yale did not even take half a step back. A cold smile flashed through his eyes as he watched the bare paw descend. Do you really think you can hurt me? Boom! All of a sudden, explosions rang out in the air. The space around Song Xiong was constantly being destroyed. Song Xiong's bare paw descended as well, gradually disappearing until only white bones were left. Roar! The immense pain made Song Xiong roar furiously at the sky. Even so, he did not retract his arm. It used its long arm, which was now only left with white bones, to forcefully slap down at Yale. Stubborn fool. Yale snorted coldly. Then he snapped his fingers at the sky. The void was destroyed. What followed was a devouring hole that resembled the mouth of an abyss. It swallowed Song Xiong's bony arm. That was not all. As it devoured the arm, Song Xiong's huge body kept moving towards the abyss. Song Xiong, bear with it. Suddenly, Qing Lan leaped up. He swung his hand like a knife. A saber shadow, which made even the heavens and the earth dim, cut through the void and landed directly onto Song Xiong's forearm, cutting it off. Song Xiong, who had pulled back with all his might, fell to the ground when his arm broke. At this time, there were two long trenches in the ground around the divine palace. They were formed when he was pulled by the abyss mouth. An ant will always be an ant. Do you think you can hurt me? Yale grinned hideously and threw Qing Lan's arm down. The arm inexplicably turned into powder and disappeared in the void before it fell a few meters. In the distance, the great sage and the others, who had called Yang Jian a jinx, also saw the foreign god race experts, who had just coexisted peacefully with them, rush towards them like a tide. Yang Jian, your mouth. The others couldn't say anything. They picked up their weapons and charged towards the Outerium Protoss experts. Song Xiong, how is it? At this moment, Song Xiong had returned to his human form. All that was left of his right arm was ghastly white bones, and everything below his forearm had disappeared. I'm fine. Song Xiong waved his hand and struggled to get up from the ground. He looked up at Yale. What's with that look? Yale slowly descended from the sky and looked straight into Song Xiong's eyes. I'll let you go just now. It's fine if you know how to repay my kindness, but how dare you look at me like that? Treacherous villain. Back then, Brother Qing Lan treated you in vain. What do you mean in the past? Since you don't appreciate my kindness, then I'll take your life back. Yale's expression darkened. He reached out and grabbed at the air. Qing Lan and Song Xiong's expressions changed drastically. At this moment, a scorching fireball suddenly fell from the sky. Yale, who was about to raise his hand, suddenly took several steps back. The fireball was charred black when it hit the ground. It's you. Yale looked up into the sky and saw a three-legged golden crow flapping its wings back and forth in flames. Your flames are very pure. I like them very much. If you're willing to be my mount. Before he could finish his sentence, Yale was greeted by several scorching fireballs. A bunch of stubborn bastards. He raised his palm, and the space around the three-legged golden crow exploded. The three-legged golden crow, which had always been rather arrogant, lost its ability to move under Yale's one move. Before long, the golden crow fell to the ground just like the fireballs he had released earlier. What a joke. You think you can shake my foundation with just a few of you? It was obvious that Yale had won a complete victory. The three demonic emperors of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda had appeared together, but they couldn't hurt Yale at all. Instead, they were covered in injuries. Qing Lan, I'm really curious. Why did you run away back then and come back for revenge? Do you think you're a match for me? Yale's words were full of mockery. Qing Lan, whose arm had been destroyed by Yale, slowly stood up from the ground, looking dejected. I'm not a match for you. Then why did you come back? That's not important. Qing Lan immediately stopped the topic. He looked at Song Xiong and the Golden Crow and said, Can you let them go for my sake? Big brother Qing Lan, roared Song Xiong. Qing Lan ignored Song Xiong's roar. She took a deep breath and lowered her head. Our grudge is between you and me. I dragged Song Xiong and the Golden Crow into this. Also, that kid, Yi Zichen, is the Lord of the Stars. According to the rules of the game, you can't detain the Lord of the Stars. No one from their era has transcended, so you can't do anything to them. How about, just let them go? Yale suddenly laughed. He looked at Qing Lan's pleading expression and couldn't help but shake his head. Are you begging me? Qing Lan didn't answer, but that was a tacit admission. Yale clasped his hands behind his back and paced back and forth. I remember you begged me once on behalf of your little sister. Don't tell me you don't remember what happened? You don't want to let them go? Why should I? I didn't even give you face back then. What right do you have to negotiate with me now? But my little sister still left. That's because she was lucky. Yale stomped his foot as if someone had touched his sore spot. I was too careless back then. I'll let your little sister leave with that outsider, which led to the current gay lovers. Now, I'm no longer the same person I was back then. You don't have that outsider here. Who said we don't? Suddenly, a chuckle rang out in the sky. Yale raised his head and saw an old man and a young woman standing above them. The instant they saw them, Yale, Qing Lan, and Song Xiong's eyes filled with shock. Chapter 1765. These people, Yang Jian and the others, all looked up into the sky, and the shock in their eyes had reached a point where it could not be any greater. What a powerful aura! After a long while, Go Yuzhan's lips quivered, his throat moving as he swallowed. The moment these people appeared in the sky, the atmosphere in the divine palace of the Northern God clan changed drastically. Yale, who had previously been full of arrogance, had lost his arrogance. A rare trace of seriousness had appeared in his eyes. These people feel like I'm old son's master, the great sage said. Venerable Xuanzang. No. The great sage shook his head. Yang Jian's eyes were filled with shock when he heard this. You mean, even though Yang Jian didn't say his name, the great sage nodded heavily. The great sage had only had two masters in his life. One was Tang Xuanzang, the reincarnated golden cicada, who'd followed him to the west on a pilgrimage to become an immortal. As for the other, Master Subhuti, even though Yang Jian had the title of true sovereign, he still had to be respectful at the mention of Master Subhuti. Even the Buddhist ancestors of the Buddhist region wouldn't dare slight Master Subhuti, much less him. The Heavenly Palace. The Buddhist region. No one knew Master Subhuti's true realm. His status was forever transcendent. The people who'd suddenly appeared in the divine realm gave the great sage the same feeling as Master Subhuti. Even in the Third Era, there might be such a realm, the ancient race. Little Li, Qinglan's lips trembled as he looked up at the beautiful woman in the sky. The crowd watched as the woman in the sky turned into a ray of green light and landed in front of Qinglan. Brother, the newcomer was none other than one of the ancient race's 3 half-step transcendence experts, Qingli. She pounced. Almost subconsciously, Qinglan opened his arms and patted her back with his left arm. Our little Li still loves to cry. He grinned at the hot tears in Qingli's eyes. His eyes were filled with joy and love. Hearing this, Qingli broke free from his embrace and wiped away her tears. No way. I'm telling you, I already have a daughter. You're an uncle now. Is that so? That's right. Actually, you met her before. It was Qingli told Qinglan about the situation in the Transcendence Tomb. After listening to her, Qinglan nodded in agreement. No wonder I felt the presence of our clan's bloodline when I came out. You're right. It was Luo Lin who told me about you. Otherwise, who knows when we would be able to meet again. Qingli nodded at Song Xiong with a smile. Brother Song Xiong, Xiaoli has really grown up. Song Xiong's eyes were filled with doting love, as if he was looking at his own younger sister. Even though Qingli's cultivation level was much higher than his and Qinglan's, it did not affect their relationship. Anger. At this moment, Yale's heart was filled with anger. They came again and again. Just as they were preparing to deal with the Aristar Lord, the prisoner escaped. Just as he was about to capture planet Lord Era, Qinglan and Song Xiong appeared again. He had finally dealt with Qinglan and the others, but now, the aboriginals were here again. Was he toying with Yale? What infuriated him even more was Qingli's attitude toward him. How dare she ignore him? From the moment Qingli arrived at Qinglan's side until now, she hadn't so much as glanced at Yale. It was as if she didn't care about him at all. Even though she was less than 10 meters away, she paid him no heed. She didn't even try to lock onto Yale's aura. This was an insult to Yale. Qingli, do you think you're worthy of saying my name? Facing Qinglan and Song Xiong, she smiled like a young girl, but as soon as Yale spoke, her expression froze into frost. She looked at him like a queen. She clearly hadn't released Su Lu, Er's ice breath, but for some reason. The instant she turned around, the temperature around the divine palace seemed even colder than when Su Lu had released her ice breath. You injured my brother and brother Song Xiong, didn't you? So what if I did? So what? A cold light flashed through Qingli's eyes. Then she turned into a blur. I'll take your life. Arrogant. In the face of Qingli's attack, Yale simply smiled coldly and pointed forward. Qinglan and Song Xiong, who'd already suffered at Yale's hands, hurriedly told Qingli to retreat. However, before they could say anything, a blur, faster than light, appeared in front of Qingli and grabbed her arm. Gu Xuanda. He'd made a move. With his back to Yale, he pointed blindly behind him, his eyes fixed on Qingli with blame. Don't forget what we're here for. Everyone stared fixedly at Gu Xuanda's finger. They'd all seen with their own eyes how Qinglan and Song Xiong had suffered at Yale's hands. Annihilation. It was a result that left everyone dumbfounded. Yale's finger, which contained the power of destruction, was annihilated the moment it touched Gu Xuanda's finger. After doing all this, Gu Xuanda retracted his hand as if nothing had happened. He ignored Yale and grinned at Qinglan. Brother-in-law, right? I've always heard Lily talk about you. Gu Xuanda, unable to conceal the rage in his heart any longer, Yale involuntarily roared. The violent sound waves caused the surrounding space to collapse and collapse. Gu Xuanda covered his ears, and his eyes were filled with displeasure. What? Can't you see that I'm busy? This is my brother-in-law. It's been a long time since I've seen him. Can't you give me some time to chat? You what? Gushwanda was displeased. Didn't I just destroy your space? Is there need to be so angry? Fine, I'll tell you directly. A few years ago, I was quite interested in your destruction great path, so I tried to comprehend it for fun. I didn't expect that I'd gained some enlightenment recently. I just condensed my Tao heart a few days ago. Destruction great path. Comprehend it for fun. Comprehended it. Condensed his Tao heart. The godly kings looked at Gushwanda in shock. His words kept echoing in their minds. This fellow was too pretentious. Many people would be grateful if they could step into the destruction great path, let alone condensing their Tao heart. But Gushwanda just casually comprehended it for fun, and he managed to condense his Tao heart. How dare you come? Yale shouted angrily. The matter of the lovers bent back, then was referring to Gushwanda and Qingli. He was a dignified, godly king, but he failed to capture an ant from another clan and even allowed him to take Qingli away. The matter of the lovers bent had always been a thorn in Yale's flesh. Now that the owner of this thorn had appeared once again, Yale's heart was filled with both rage and excitement. The time to wash away the humiliation had finally arrived. All of a sudden, the aura around Yale changed. Gushwanda also turned around at this moment. I'm not here to fight with you. If you want to fight, we'll meet in the third era. Chapter 1766. There was nothing special about a finger snap. It was not aggressive at all. When Gushwanda's finger snap resounded in the void of the deity palace, the ordinary upper, middle, and lower deities, as well as the lords, were not hurt. A finger snap could destroy a world. Gushwanda's finger snap was merely a signal to retreat. Don't even think about leaving since you're here. Yale's eyes shone fiercely. His surging divine power turned into a violent wind. The void collapsed. Countless abyssal mouths that represented devouring and annihilation were like the eyes of the firmament. The heaven and earth rules were completely destroyed. Space was as fragile as a piece of paper. It was so fragile that one could pierce through it with a finger. Aren't you afraid that the masters of the laws will come looking for you after breaking the outer realm heaven and earth rules? Gushwanda raised his thick eyebrows. There was a hint of a smile in his eyes. The outer realm gods lived in the upper plane, but heaven and earth were controlled by the laws. Even the outer realm gods could not escape the existence of the laws. Breaking the laws was not allowed. The moment Yale cut off the connection between this place and the laws, it meant that he had broken the balance set by the laws. It was also a provocation to the masters of the laws. If you had used force, it might have taken us some time to leave. Yet, you chose the worst path. You broke the laws to interrupt the transfer hub I left here. Do you think that's a smart move? At least it's enough to deal with you before they come. That might not be the case. Looking at Gushwanda's smile, Yale's anger was like magma gushing out of a volcano. It poured into his heart and made him even more furious. It was this smile, during the lovers' bent battle, Gushwanda had this same smile. It was also this smile that led to the current lovers' bent and made him the laughingstock of the entire divine race. Even though the divine emperor did not blame him, and his colleagues did not mention a word about it, it was as if nothing had happened. However, Yale could see the mockery in their eyes. It was as if they were saying, "Look, someone married an outsider in the area under the jurisdiction of the northern divine race's divine king." Not only that, but he was also toyed with by the outsider and managed to escape unscathed from his hands. It seemed like the God King of Destruction's title as the number one God King of the celestial race was undeserved. What a joke. Not only did he run away, but he also left behind a lover syndrome. In the future, he would have to visit lover's syndrome more often and make him feel ashamed. They had long seen that he was no good. He had the lowest bloodline of the outer realm god race. Even if he became a god monarch, how capable could he be? A lowly pauper would always be a pauper. Did he really think that just because he became a god king, he would become a phoenix from a chicken? You should take a look at himself first. Shut up. Yale covered his ears and bellowed angrily. As he raged, the surrounding space was destroyed. The spatial turbulence swept around him as if it wanted to swallow him whole. Master, The divine kings were worried that Yale would be swept into the crack, so they all tried their best to stay close to him. But right at that moment, the enraged Yale reached out his hand, and a black ball that was formed entirely out of the power of destruction slammed right into the chest of the Master God of Pain, who was charging right at the front. Moss, the Master God of Pain, suddenly stopped and looked at Yale with a confused look in his eyes. The other Master Gods were stunned too. At that moment, the Master God of Pain's chest was completely penetrated, and the black ball was still using its power of destruction to turn the Master God of Destruction's body into dust with his chest as the center. Dead. A Master God of a generation died in Yale's hands just like that. The Master God of Pain's godhead also turned into an ownerless object and floated in the void. No matter who obtained this ownerless object, they would be able to condense it into their own godhead after refining it a little. In other words, obtaining this godhead would mean that they could become the new Master God of Pain. But it was such a tempting godhead that no one dared to take even half a step forward. Is he a demon? Gushwanda's existence was too dazzling. From the moment he appeared, everyone's eyes were on him, so much so that they forgot about the old man in the void. Qing Li and Gushwanda flew down, but the old man stood still in the void. It was only when Yale killed the overgod of pain that he was sitting on with bloodshot eyes that he muttered to himself. He won't amount to much. After a long time, the old man shook his head and shifted his gaze away. It was as if looking at Yale any longer would be a waste of his time. Lil Lee, brother-in-law, hurry up and leave. This guy's gone mad. Gushwanda was also frightened by Yale's roar and the fact that he'd killed the Master God of Pain. He could naturally tell that Yale had fallen into his own demon. Years of battle experience told him that this sort of person was the worst kind of person to provoke. He didn't have any sense of reason at all. Everything he did was to vent his anger. Go die for me. Yale jerked his head around. Only then did everyone see that his eyes had long since turned crimson. However, when he stretched out his arm and was about to grab Gushwanda, who was the closest to him, the space around him suddenly distorted. His hand only touched an afterimage. Hey, this Master of the Laws really came at the right time. He grinned, then saw that it wasn't just him. The space around Yi Zichen and the others was also distorted. Snatch that Master God's godhead, shouted Qing Li from within the distorted space. Gushwanda grinned. You don't need to tell me to know. With that, Lin Fan stretched out his hand, and the golden divine core of the Master God of Pain appeared in his palm. Yale was furious. He urged the surrounding abysses to swallow him up. Thank you so much. You even gave me a Master God's godhead just for this trip. You're so generous. I'm a bit embarrassed. Whoosh. Brilliant white light flashed, illuminating the world. Qinglan, Yi Zichen, and the others of the Third Era disappeared from the Divine Palace. Yale's eyes grew even redder, and streams of angry red energy radiated from his body. All of you stay here. As he watched Gushwanda and the others leave, Yale tried to break the laws of the outside realm and sever their spatial connection. However, this time, his destruction couldn't keep up with the law's healing speed. Before long, 3 men and women appeared above the Divine Palace, glowing with golden light. They were standing very high. The divine race experts around the Divine Palace couldn't see their faces clearly. However, they could see that there was a lightning-like brand between the eyebrows of these men and women. Each of them held a thick tome in their hands. They looked down at them like heavenly gods. It was at this moment that everyone from the Outer Realm God race knew. Chapter 1767. The lightning seal represented heavenly punishment. The conspicuous lightning mark on the foreheads of these people was enough to prove their identity and status. The sky gradually darkened. This darkness was different from the darkness of Qinglan's darkness godhood. All the light of heaven and earth seemed to converge on the figures in the sky. The surrounding darkness only served to accentuate their dazzling golden radiance. Greetings, Master of the Laws. Some of the outer world gods prostrated themselves on the ground, followed by the rest of the Divine Palace. The overgods placed their hands on their chests and bowed deeply to the Masters of the Laws. In the outer world, the masters of the laws were transcendent existences. Even the God Emperor had to show them some respect. The outer world God, King of Destruction. Suddenly, the master of the laws uttered these words in a dignified tone. Yale's scarlet eyes glared at the sky. Even though he was facing the masters of the laws, his killing intent still surged out like a tidal wave. He had no rationality to speak of. Anyone who stood against him was an enemy. What was laughable was that the three masters of the laws continued to maintain their transcendent status, constantly pressuring Yale. God, King of Destruction, you've broken the chain of laws. Since this is your first offense, your divine power will be sealed for 3 months to serve as a warning to others. The master of the laws flipped open an ancient tome in his hand. Countless golden threads flew out, fluttering toward Yale like butterflies. It's you. To everyone's surprise, Yale stretched out a finger and pointed at the masters of the laws. This kind of behavior was disrespectful to the masters of the laws. However, Yale's disrespect was yet to come. Explode. The golden threads appeared in the air, and the broken threads were swallowed up by the surrounding abysses. The outer world masters' auras trembled visibly. God, King of Destruction, are you defying our orders? You let them go, didn't you? Since that's the case, you'll have to pay the debt. With a loud boom, the ground beneath Yale's feet cracked. Countless pieces of rubble flew everywhere, and a massive crater appeared beneath his feet. He leapt into the air, his hand reaching out viciously towards the master of the laws, who stood in the middle of them all. In response, the masters of the laws didn't seem too flustered. It was as if they'd experienced this sort of situation many times before. The two masters of the laws on either side took half a step back, then placed their palms on the shoulders of the master of the laws in the center. Golden light gathered into a golden pyramid. God, King Annihilation, if you give up resisting, you might be dealt with leniently. Die! Yale's eyes were bloodshot, and the sovereigns beneath him were all stupefied. They were supposed to stop Yale, but all of them stood there in a daze. Some of them were scared stiff. They never imagined that Yale would attack the master of the laws. Not to mention, the fate of the Pain Master God also made them not dare to offend Yale at a time like this. Under everyone's gaze, Yale's palm fiercely pressed against the pyramid. He didn't know whether to say that Yale's attacks were stronger or that the master of the law's defenses were stronger. On the surface of the pyramid, there was a smoking handprint. God, King of Destruction, this is our second warning to you. Give up resisting. Give up resisting. Eyes bloodshot, Yale flashed a strange smile. From the looks of it, he was the one on the offensive. What was there to say about resisting? All he wanted to do was kill these hindering masters of the laws. Break for me. Bang! Another heavy palm descended. From the shattering of the surrounding space, it was clear that Yale's attack contained the power of the Grand Tao of Destruction. As the palm descended, a huge crack appeared in the golden tower the master of the laws had condensed. Break! Yale roared again. Just as his palm was about to land, Yale stopped. A furious voice shouted from the sky. Then, a beam of pure white light shot through the air like an arrow. In the blink of an eye, it arrived in front of the master of the laws and slammed a palm at Yale. The two palms collided, and to everyone's surprise, Yale fell heavily to the ground like a cannonball after their palms collided. After that, 3 more beams of light shot through the sky and landed behind the white light. Yale, you really are impudent. Just a moment ago, the over-gods were still wondering who could send Yale flying with a single palm strike. But when they saw the white-haired old man standing in front of the master of the laws, his eyes blazing with fury, divine, your majesty. Greetings, your majesty. Both over-gods and true gods knelt on the ground. The God Emperor glared furiously at Yale, who had crashed to the ground and coughed up golden blood. After a long while, he turned to look apologetically at the master of the laws. Please calm your anger, your majesty. Thank you for your help, your majesty. Greetings, your majesty. The 3 masters of the laws nodded at the God Emperor and the people behind him. That palm strike, or rather, Yale's heavy fall to the ground, had brought him back to his senses. He clutched his chest, and tried to move, but a burst of pain shot through his back. Only then did he realize that the bones in his back had been broken. The God Emperor. When he came to his senses, he thought he heard the God Emperor's name. When he looked up into the sky, he happened to see the God Emperor's furious face, as well as his 3 colleagues, the God Kings, and the 3 Masters of the Laws. When he thought back to what he'd just done, Yale couldn't help but want to slap himself. What the hell was he doing? Enduring the pain in his back, he crawled to his feet. Yale lowered his head, tapped the ground with the tip of his foot, and floated over to the white-haired old man. God dash slap! The old man viciously slapped Yale across the face. Yale stood motionless in front of the God Emperor, gritting his teeth and hanging his head. If I hadn't come, would you have killed them all? I wouldn't dare. I wouldn't dare. I think you're just afraid to say it, but deep down, you might even be interested in my position as the God Emperor. I wouldn't dare. With a thud, Yale knelt on the ground and buried his head. The God Emperor's face was still filled with rage. He turned to the Masters of the Laws. Your Majesty, there's no need to be like this. We won't take the matter of the God King of Destruction to heart, but he won't be able to escape punishment. More golden strands flew out from the Master of the Law's ancient records. It was obvious that Yale wanted to resist, but with the God Emperor present, he could only allow the golden strands to reach his forehead. The golden strands wrapped themselves tightly around his godhead, making it impossible for anything to pass through. The God King of Destruction broke the laws of heaven and earth and disobeyed his superiors. Despite repeated warnings, his divine sea was sealed for half a year. If he commits this offense again, he'll be severely punished. Yale clenched his fists. He could clearly feel his godhead gradually losing its connection to him, and he couldn't control his divine sea in the slightest. It could be said that from now on, he wasn't even as good as an ordinary Lesser Lord God. Chapter 1768. In the majestic palace of destruction, a thick, black fog enveloped the throne of the God King in the divine palace. The main gods under Yale all stood on either side of the palace, their hands clasped behind their backs. The war goddess was among them. As for the black fog, it was naturally the product of the God King of Destruction, Yale. Indeed, Yale's divine ocean had been sealed. Apart from his body, he was no different from an ordinary person. Even a lower god would have the absolute upper hand if they fought Yale now. If they were lucky, they might even be able to kill the God King. He'd fallen from the lofty God King to this state. This drastic change made Yale want to be angry, but he didn't dare. He could only store his anger in the depths of his heart, and the black fog was the manifestation of all his negative emotions. A solemn atmosphere enveloped the palace for a long time. Yale, who had been sealed in the deity's sea, should not have given the overgods any pressure. However, the fear in the overgods' hearts was even greater than before. Why was this happening? In terms of realm, Yale's divine ocean had been sealed. He couldn't use his godhead, nor could he circulate his divine power. Right now, he posed no threat to the God Kings at all. As long as they wanted to, they could easily behead Yale, who was sitting on the throne of the God King. Gradually, they understood in their hearts. It was that black fog. The black fog in the palace had unleashed Yale's evilest side. The negative emotions in the fog made them tremble from the depths of their souls. As a result, the God Kings all stood in the palace, silent out of fear. They didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Bang! Yale, who'd been sitting on the throne for several hours, suddenly slammed his hand on the armrest. Instantly, all the God Kings in the palace knelt on the ground, cold sweat dripping down their backs. The only one left standing was the war goddess. She couldn't kneel to Yale. Even if Yale was the God King and she was a God King, she was still the God King closest to the God King. Besides, she hadn't participated in the battle just now. The other 11 God Kings had participated, but she hadn't. She was already giving Yale face by not questioning him directly. However, she still bowed slightly. This was the respect that a main god should have for the God King. Damn it, these damned masters of the laws and that damned. Sir Divine King, please watch your words. The war goddess suddenly opened her mouth and interrupted Yale's words. Yale, who was already enraged by his subordinate's interruption, looked over with reddened eyes. The other main gods pressed him tightly against the ground. They did not dare to provoke Yale at a time like this. In their hearts, they despised the war goddess for being spoiled and arrogant. In the past, it was true that Yale doted on the goddess of war. However, Yale had just become a god-see god. At this time, if the goddess of war still thought that she had a special identity and acted presumptuously because of Yale's love, she would definitely not have a good ending. Sure enough, when Yale looked over, there was no tenderness in his eyes, only uncontrollable rage. "What did you just say?" From Yale's words, one could sense how gloomy his words were. They were like the omen of a volcano eruption, and they were like a heavy hammer that fiercely knocked on the ears of everyone in the palace. "Lord Deity King, please be careful with your words and actions," the war goddess said without changing her expression. "Are you teaching me a lesson?" Suddenly, Yale stood up from the divine king's throne. The surging black fog rushed towards the standing war goddess. "What? Seeing that my god-see has been sealed, you want to sit on this seat as well?" As soon as he finished speaking, Yale looked at the other main gods and shouted angrily, "And the rest of you, do you all want to sit on my seat?" "I wouldn't dare." The main gods kowtowed to the ground. Under the black fog, Yale's face was so ferocious that he looked like a mindless beast. He panted heavily as he looked at the other main gods, then at the goddess of war. "Is that what you think?" "Of course not," the war goddess said. "No, I'm reminding you for your own good. Master of the law, you can say whatever you want. As long as you don't break the rules, no matter how you slander them, they can't do anything to you. But if you say what you want to say, even if we fight to the death, we won't be able to save your life." "Do you know what I want to say?" "I don't know. My thoughts are just conjectures. Thinking of this possibility, I naturally have to remind you not to make a mistake, especially at a time like this." The war goddess stared straight into Yale's angry eyes, not showing the slightest bit of fear. Yale also stared at the war goddess. After a long time, he sat back down in his chair and said dejectedly, "You're right to remind me." Then he raised his hand again. His mood was a little gloomy, but he wasn't as mad as before. "All of you rise." Hearing this, the main gods stood up. Their expressions were filled with respect and gratitude for the war goddess. If Yale continued to be so angry, they didn't know what would happen in the future. The Master of Pain would already be dead. "Please, Divine King, raise your spirits. The Master of the Law only sealed your god-see for half a year. It doesn't mean that your god-see will be sealed in the future. Compared to your lifespan, half a year is like a drop in the ocean. Why don't you take this half a year as a vacation? Rest well. We'll take care of everything else in the North God tribe. Sivir, you are our master. If you fall, what should we, your subordinates, do? Please, you must raise your spirits. With you here, the North God tribe is the real North God tribe. With you here, the god of Destruction Palace is the real god of Destruction Palace." The war goddess's words were sincere and sincere. Yale looked at her for a long time, a little moved. "You won't blame me for hiding what happened just now from you, right? Divine King, you naturally have your own considerations." "I won't blame you," the war goddess said. "The atmosphere in this god of Destruction Palace doesn't seem too good." Just then, a chuckle sounded at the entrance of the god of Destruction Palace. A young man in a white robe appeared outside the door. Behind him were two men and a woman. "Freedom." Yale's eyes narrowed. "Destruction." The young man in the white robe laughed lightly. "Looks like having your god-see sealed has affected your emotions quite a bit. That's none of your business. What are you doing here? If you're here to laugh at me, I don't welcome you here," Yale said angrily. "Hey, bro, you're making me a little sad," the Freedom God King said, shrugging. "I'm here because I'm worried about your situation, so I came to take a look. Also, I have some good news for you." Chapter 1769. Recently, a hero's invitation had caused an uproar among the gods, Yao, and demons. The hero post was promoted through the official account, and it reached all races. Anyone with a phone developed by the Upheaval Alliance saw the post. As for its content, Everyone knew that the era was coming to an end, but the vast majority of experts didn't know why it was coming to an end or how it would come to an end. The hero's invitation, however, clearly mentioned news of the outsiders. In other words, the Upheaval Alliance had used it to clear the dark clouds hanging over their heads. The goal of the hero's invitation was to recruit all the heroes of the world and fight the enemy together. In less than 6 hours, the hero's invitation exploded. Half a day later, ambitious people began to flood into Chaos City in large numbers, filling up the cities around Chaos City. There were Yao, demons, and humans among them. No matter what race they were or what color they were, the Upheaval Alliance treated everyone equally. The response to the hero's invitation has been overwhelming. The 6 surrounding cities are almost full, Xiao Yumei reported. Xiao Yumei summarized the situation on the Divine Mountains and reported it to Yi Zichen. With Su Yan's life force healing him, Yi Zichen's frightening injuries stabilized and improved. Logically speaking, the best thing for Yi Zichen to do right now was rest. However, the current situation didn't give him the luxury of time to slack off. Xiao Yumei was currently supporting him with her divine power as they made their way to the guest tower. "The cities are full," said Yi Zichen. "Tell the Alliance's craftsmen to work overtime." The hero's invitation was just sent out, so this trend will continue for a while longer. "I've already given the order." Xiao Yumei nodded. "I doubt too many people will come. After all, most people have to obey the orders of their superiors. Most of the people here are independent cultivators, but of course, we can't rule out the possibility of spies mixed in. Treat everyone equally." That was all Yi Zichen could say in response. Everyone knew that there were definitely spies here. The gods, Yao, and demons still weren't united. Yi Zichen was exhausted. He had truly witnessed the power of the Outer Realm god race. In the Northern God clan alone, there were countless lower gods, middle gods, and higher gods. The realm of an overgod was at least on par with a monarch like Emperor Hades. One had to know that Ming Di was considered one of the most powerful beings in the human race. Even a chief god could match it, and there were still divine kings and divine emperors above it. Later, during the conference, Yi Zichen would share the information he'd learned with the others. More importantly, he had to use the Emperor Star's brilliance as flexibly as possible. He had to transcend as quickly as possible. Alliance Master, all the great powers have been waiting in the palace for a long time. As they spoke, they arrived at the 8th floor of the guest tower. They didn't go up to the top floor because the elemental fairies were still occupying the top floor. Inshang walked up to Yi Zichen. Yi Zichen nodded at him and entered the hall. "Leader Yi." The experts in the hall all cupped their fists and looked around. The emperors of the Upheaval Alliance, such as the Fox's Empress, the Sea Emperor, Great Emperor Baian, and Great Emperor Chao Feng, were all present. At the same time, there were many familiar yet strange faces in the hall. The Yao King of the Eastern Nation, the heads of the Dragon race, the Vermilion Bird race, and Wei Chun, the acting head of the White Tiger race. Yi Zichen could understand why the Yao King of the Eastern Nation and the other clan heads had come. The Eastern Nation's relationship with the Western regions and Southern Empire wasn't exactly harmonious. The Northern Empire didn't help either side, and they were related to the Foxes. It was only natural for them to join the alliance. But Gu Xuanda and Qing Li, 2 half-step transcendents of the ancients, were here as well. Yi Zichen's gaze lingered on Gu Xuanda for a long time. After returning to Chaos City, he heard some news. He knew that their safe return was all thanks to Gu Xuanda. Since he was here, it meant that he wanted to contribute to the fight against the Outer Domain God Clan. "Everyone's here." Yi Zichen retracted his gaze and sat down in his seat. Xiao Yumei stood by his side, using her divine power to maintain his condition. "Alliance Master Yi, speak frankly. We've all heard that you've gone to the Outerium Protoss." As soon as Yi Zichen took his seat, the Ocean Emperor spoke up. It was just as he'd said. There was no need for pleasantries. Let's get straight to the point and get to the heart of the problem. Everyone present had to come up with a solution. Time was of the essence. They couldn't afford to waste it. "I did, but I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint you. The information I gathered was very ordinary. I only know that the toughness of the Outer Realm gods' materials is much higher than ours. This also means that their weapons are much stronger than ours. Then there are the origin breaker beasts. Not just beasts of the land, but also sea beasts and birds. Birds? In other words, the pressure on your sea of innocence will be extraordinarily great in the future. Emperor Hades already told my clone all of this. The Ocean Emperor glanced at Emperor Hades. It seemed the two of them had discussed this beforehand and were already planning how to deal with the outsiders. That's all I know, but I have someone here who knows even more. As soon as he finished speaking, the Devil King Pilar appeared in front of everyone. This is Devil King Pilar of the Fiend race, a good friend I met in the time corridor. The evil demon race and the god race belonged to the first race. Both sides had clashed for several epochs. It could be said that no one understood the god race better than him. In addition, I also have Uncle Lon, Song Xiong. Qinglon and Song Xiong also walked in from outside the hall. When Qingli saw them, she smiled and waved at them. These two used to live in the Outer Realm celestial race. They have a very detailed understanding of the Outer Realm celestial race. After explaining things to the other great emperors, Yi Zichen turned to them. Thank you. Qinglon nodded politely in response, then looked at Pilar and gestured for him to speak first. At the same time, she took half a step back. Pilar took a deep breath and looked at the faces of the powerful people in the hall. From their eyes, he could sense their urgency and worry, as well as their surging desire for knowledge. The Outer Realm celestial race was simply too foreign to them. They wanted to know everything there was to know about it. I've been here for a while now. Ever since Yi Zichen brought me here, I've been gathering information on you, but the results have disappointed me. Chapter 1770. All the great emperors in the hall had their own pride to be able to reach their current positions. Even though the Dragon Emperor of the Dragon race was considered a little older among the imperial emperors, and the passage of time had already smoothed out his edges and corners, he still had a sense of pride in his bones. At this time, it could be said that nearly half of the forces of the human race and the demon race had gathered in the palace. Among them were even the ancient race. However, Pilar told them that what awaited them was death. No matter what, they could not accept such an answer. The arrogant, great emperor of the Four Directions Palace, Bayan, frowned. The other emperors reacted the same way. It was clear from their gazes that they disliked Pilar's words. The only reason they hadn't acted up was out of respect for Yi Zichen. If Yi Zichen hadn't mentioned Pilar's status, never mind the others, Bayan absolutely would have retorted. Pilar and Yi Zichen caught everyone's gazes. Yi Zichen couldn't blame Pilar for saying something like that. In his opinion, there was nothing wrong with the other great emperors doing the same. They had never truly witnessed the power of the Outer Realm god race. They looked at each other. Then Yi Zichen nodded at Pilar, indicating for him to continue. At a time like this, there was no point in hiding anything. Yi Zichen hoped that Pilar would be a bit more vicious and shatter the great emperor's pride. Only in this way could they feel a real sense of crisis and counterattack. I know that all of you here are people of great ability. Even if you don't show it, it's inevitable that you will feel conflicted about what I just said. It's just that I'm merely stating a fact that you can't accept. Pilar clasped his hands behind his back and paced back and forth in the middle of the hall with a height of less than 5 meters. He shuttled back and forth in the line of sight of the great emperors. Humans in Yao, there are less than 30 imperial lords and less than 200 emperors who can stand with Yi Zichen against the god race. You might say, how could you possibly know the hidden strength of all of us? I really don't know, but even if I did, how many could there be? There are more than 10 master gods in the Northern God clan alone. Any one of the over-gods is stronger than any of the emperors here. Perhaps they're on par with each other, but they're definitely not weaker than you. There are also experts who are on par with the imperial monarchs here among the high gods. You guys, do you know how many higher gods there are in the Outer Realm? Suddenly, Pilar extended 2 fingers and stared at the great emperors. 20,000. 20,000 high gods. This time, the gazes of the great emperors in the hall changed. Their gazes were different from before. At this moment, Their gazes were filled with shock. It was indescribable horror. 20,000 high gods. In other words, there are at least 20,000 imperial monarchs? How many divine generals and emperors do you have here? 1,000,000? But the Northern God clan has nearly 1,000,000 middle gods. There's also the ruler here. The ruler can be considered an expert here, but in the Outer Realm celestial race, he is at most an entry-level lower god who has just condensed his divine spark. With such a great disparity, I don't know how you can withstand the attack of the god race. Besides, I haven't told you how terrifying their divine kings and divine emperors, who are above the chief gods, are. It was a wordless silence. Just by analyzing the data, the great emperors in the hall felt their hearts sink again. The Northern God clan could tell that this was only a small part of the Outer Realm's territory. Just a small part was enough to make them feel such immense pressure. If the other god races attacked together, they didn't dare imagine the consequences. Yi Zichen sat on his throne, paying close attention to the changes in the great emperor's expressions. When he sensed their heavy moods, he glanced meaningfully at Pilar, hinting for him to stop talking. Pressure was necessary, but too much pressure could easily lead to the opposite effect. Pilar understood and stopped talking. Qinglan and Song Xiong glanced at Yi Zichen. They knew it was time for them to step forward. In truth, it's not as serious as the Demon King makes it sound. Qinglan walked out with a smile. His smile was like a spring breeze that eased the mood of the great emperors in the hall. I once lived among the Outer Realm gods for a long time, so I have some understanding of them. The Lord Devil King is right. The Northern God clan does indeed have such a military force, but it's impossible for them to attack the era. They can't go all out, but if the other places split their forces here, then the result. One of the great emperors in the hall opened his mouth, but he hesitated. Qinglan smiled and looked at the great emperor. This is also what I'm about to say. Actually, the Outer Realm divine race is not as united as everyone thinks. The great emperors were shocked as they stared at Qinglan. Although he didn't say it clearly, all the great emperors could guess what he meant. The four great divine kings of the god race's four realms have very different temperaments. At the very least, I feel that the Western realms have no interest in attacking the new era. The only one who liked to attack was the Northern region's godly king of destruction's territory. Unfortunately, the four regions restricted each other. If he wanted to attack the era, he had to consider whether the other three regions would attack him. His house. He won't be able to dispatch more than 30% of his men. I'm untalented, but I happen to be the eldest son of the Qing family. Although I haven't returned to my clan in 10,000 years. So long as I show up, at least 50% of the Qing family will follow me. Some of the leaders of the ore-breaking beasts are my underlings, said Song Xiong with a grin. I can try contacting the Wei family of the southern region. At that moment, Wei Jie suddenly walked out of the hall. Sensing the great emperor's gazes, as well as Yi Zichen's astonishment, Wei Jie couldn't help but smile wryly. In truth, I'm the eldest grandson of the Wei family of the southern region. I'm sorry, Alliance Head. I've been lying to you this whole time. In truth, I'm not. Don't apologize. This is a good thing. Yi Zichen's eyes flashed with sincerity. Your identity is a pleasant surprise to us. Why should we blame you? Yi Zichen gestured to Wei Jie not to blame himself, then turned to the great emperors and smiled. I believe that all the great emperors have a certain understanding in their hearts. The Outer Realm god race is far stronger than we imagined. We can't afford to be conceited, but just because they're strong doesn't mean we have no hope. From now on, all we need to do is carefully deploy our forces. In the future, we'll still have a chance to fight. What's more, there's another piece of good news for us, and that is, if the god race wants to attack us, they'll need a transcendent expert. In other words, before I transcend, the god race can't attack us. We'll have plenty of time to increase our strength. Chapter 1771. Compared to the Divine Mountains, where hegemons divided up their own territories, the lower lands have been unified. In the past few years, the Upheaval Alliance had become the most powerful. They'd taken control of all the forces there. Even if they weren't, the other clans and families were still vassals to the Alliance. After the unification, the lower lands' resources were redistributed. The Upheaval Alliance's democracy overthrew the former aristocratic clan's rule. Anyone, whether they were a high official, a noble family, or a commoner, had a chance to enter the secret realm. Countless ordinary people respected the Upheaval Alliance's equal rights, and their position was stable. OL3, you're in the secret realm again. Somewhere in the secret realm, a small team was cheerfully calling out to another team. In the past, this kind of situation would never have happened. The secret realm was completely under the control of a few peak-level factions. Anyone who didn't belong to one of them would be warned off if they tried to get within 100 miles. Yeah, I got lucky. Last time, I found an antique and gave it to the Upheaval Alliance in exchange for some points. A few days ago, my son broke through to Human Immortal, and he kept saying he wanted a treasure-grade weapon. I used up some points and got a chance to enter the secret realm. I'll buy him a treasure next time. How lucky. When they heard OL3's response, the other team couldn't help but feel envious. Under the Upheaval Alliance's rule, everyone could enter the secret realm, but they could only enter for free once every 6 months. If they wanted to enter the secret realm multiple times, they had to use contribution points or points to exchange. This was already quite democratic. After all, the Upheaval Alliance wasn't a welfare organization. Such a large alliance needed resources to operate. Being able to enter the secret realm for free once every 6 months was already enough to make the people of the lower lands weep with gratitude. If you wanted to enter the secret realm more often, you had to use points. They understood. The team that had just entered the secret realm for free. When they heard that OL3's team had found an antique and gotten a lot of points, it was only natural that they were envious. You guys had a good harvest, didn't you? Asked OL3. Not bad. When OL3 mentioned their harvest, the other team's eyes flashed with delight. It was obvious that they'd gained quite a bit this time. Look at your smile, you old bastard. I can tell it's good. Third brother laughed heartily. Just then, a drop of liquid hit his head. He subconsciously reached out and touched it, then looked at the clear sky. Why is it raining? Third brother retracted his hand after wiping his hair and looked at his palm. Dark red. What entered his eyes was a patch of red. He brought his palm to his nose and sniffed it lightly. It was blood. Little did they know that this drop of blood was just the beginning. Blood rain. People in the surroundings kept shouting in anger. At this moment, the rain of blood also poured down, dyeing the entire world red. A thick, nauseating stench filled the surroundings of the secret realm. How could this be? Old Third blankly stared as the blood rain drenched him. Thick blood hung on his body, but he didn't use his spiritual power to shake off the blood. Instead, he wiped it with his hand and brought it to his nose. It's human blood, and a lot of human blood. All of a sudden, Old Third looked up above his head. Right above their heads was a majestic, divine mountain. Old Third's heart trembled. He glared at the people around him and shouted, "Hurry! Notify the Upheaval Alliance." Reporting, 3 blood-soaked youths hurried into the Upheaval Alliance's guest tower. The thick stench of blood wafted from their bodies. When the great emperors looked at them, Yi Zichen's expression darkened. What's going on? How'd you get all that blood? Alliance head, it's the lower lands. The young man kneeling in the middle raised his head and frantically took out a blood-stained cell phone from his pocket. A rain of blood suddenly descended from the lower lands. This is a video I recorded just now. Alliance head, please take a look. Wei Jie took the phone and handed it to Yi Zichen, then played the video. The other great emperors looked at Yi Zichen and saw that his brows were tightly knit together. For a long while, they didn't relax. How could this be? Yi Zichen raised his head and waved his hand. A curtain appeared within the hall, and the scene within was, to everyone's astonishment, the lower lands. The other great emperors could see what was going on through the curtain as well. What they saw, it was a torrential rain of blood. A rain of blood. Dragon Emperor stroked his beard. Although we're in the upper plains, we're still on the same plane as the lower lands. We're perfectly fine, so why is there a rain of blood down here? Wei Jie, shouted Yi Zichen. Yes, sir. You were in charge of the Upheaval Alliance in the lower lands. Where is this secret realm? If I'm not mistaken, it belongs to the lower lands of the Central Divine Mountain. Yi Zichen's expression instantly grew unsightly. He turned to the door and shouted, "Guards! Guards!" Two guards immediately appeared outside the door. Yi Zichen said, "Who's keeping an eye on the central divine mountain? Tell them to come see me immediately." "No, they don't need to come. Contact them immediately. I want to know everything about the central divine mountain." "Alliance head, do you think?" The great emperors spoke up. Yi Zichen didn't respond. Instead, he glanced at Pilar, who looked right back at him and nodded slightly. That blood-red barrier. Back when Yi Zichen and the others emerged from the time corridor, Pilar had said there was something wrong with the barrier. Yi Zichen had sensed a faint, pungent odor. However, he hadn't paid it much attention at the time. Now that he connected it to this rain of blood, that pungent odor was the smell of blood. The two guards hurried off to contact the people watching over the central divine mountain. Everyone else sat in the hall and waited for their return. However, before they could do so, they heard two more whistling sounds. Yi Zichen looked at the door, and his heart sank. It wasn't just anyone. It was Yang Jian and the great sage. They'd been following Yi Zichen this entire time, and they were both imperial lords. The great emperors in the hall all recognized them. When they saw Yang Jian and the great sage enter, their expressions grave, they looked at each other. "It looks like the situation is terrible." Yi Zichen let out a deep sigh, then heard Yang Jian and the great sage speak in unison. Their words caused the great emperors to leap to their feet. Chapter 1772. In the chaotic void. In the outskirts of the Third Era's border, dozens of huge beasts squatted in the void and ate. Their food was tiny compared to their bodies. The food they grabbed with their fingers was like shrimp, and they threw it into their mouths in handfuls. Their mouths wriggled slightly, and many broken bones were spat out. Then they grabbed another handful of food and threw it into their mouths. Dark red blood dyed the beasts' mouths red, and the thick smell of blood lingered in the chaotic void for a long time. Many destroyed towers could be seen around these giant beasts. As for the food in their mouths, it was the human city defense troops that were once stationed in the outskirts. What a bunch of pitiful fellows. A low voice suddenly appeared in the tranquil void. This person was dressed in white, and he was particularly eye-catching in the chaotic void. He looked at the beasts throwing humans into their mouths with an indifferent smile, and then glanced at the surrounding towers. They've extended their defense to the outskirts. If they were given a few more years, I really don't know what the situation would be like when they come here again. This is all thanks to you, God King Pleasure. If it weren't for you, please don't call me God King Pleasure. Please call me the great artist, His Majesty. A ripple appeared in the void in front of the white-clothed man, and a red-nosed clown walked out of the ripple. Yes, His Majesty. The white-clothed man smiled. After appearing, His Majesty glanced at the army behind the white-clothed man. At a glance, there were at least 100,000 troops behind the white-clothed man. Among these people were beast tamers, and huge beasts followed them. The others were all dressed in white, just like the white impermanence of the underworld. The only difference was that they had a golden bird of paradise on their chests, which symbolized freedom. Not artistic at all. The artist, His Majesty, couldn't help but shake his head at the monotonous clothing. We're just some vulgar people. It's hard for us to be elegant. Please forgive us, His Majesty. The white-clothed man smiled. Speaking of which, why isn't Yale here? I think that guy knows a lot about art. Hasn't he always been interested in destroying eras? The eras and the demon clan he destroyed could be called works of art. I like to communicate with people who understand art. Where is he? I'm going to find him. Yes, they said. His condition isn't too good. His Majesty sealed his divine sense C and made him face the wall in the divine palace. If it wants to see him, I'm afraid it'll have to go back to the divine palace to find him. Oh no, this is really bad news. But I won't go to see him. Although I like his works of art, I won't mess with that old guy, the Emperor God. His wrath is something His Majesty can't bear. Don't be too disappointed, Your Majesty. Although Yale can't come, I brought the main god under him. As soon as he finished speaking, the man in white turned around and pointed behind him. Behind him were all the main gods under Yale, and the one leading them was the war goddess. These people are all core gods who have fought with Yale for many years, especially this war goddess. Yale has passed the authority to command the Northern God Clan to her. Is that so? His Majesty's eyes flashed with surprise. He instantly appeared in front of the war goddess and looked her up and down. I can't feel any artistic aura from you. I don't know why, but your eyes make great artists feel annoyed. I feel the same way, the war goddess snorted. If you think that the stench you're giving off is a manifestation of your artistic aura, then I'm really sorry. I can't enjoy your artistic aura, and I'm especially disgusted by it. War. The main gods behind him looked nervous. This toad-like guy in front of them was the god king of joy of the four god kings. His status was equal to Yale's god king of destruction. Although the war goddess was in the divine palace of destruction and could do this because of Yale's love, the god king of joy are an interesting guy. Unexpectedly, His Majesty didn't get angry at the war goddess's attack. Instead, he smiled and looked at her meaningfully for a long time before retracting his gaze and taking a few steps back. I'll keep an eye on you. Don't disappoint me. Then, he returned to the man in white and looked at the third era, who was very close to them. When exactly are you going to leave? I can't wait to carve the artwork in my heart. Is His Majesty anxious? The man in white smiled. I wanted to let these little guys eat their fill before working. Since he can't wait, we'll leave now. That's for the best. When we reach the third era, I'll show you the artwork I've painstakingly carved. That pitiful guy? Yes, His Majesty smiled. Although he's a pitiful guy, he's my most satisfying work. Then I'll wait and see. You'll definitely be amazed. The great emperors in the hall stared at each other with tense expressions. Yang Jian and the great sage's words echoed in their minds. The Outer Realm Protoss had arrived. Just an hour ago, they had almost lost their confidence because of Pilar. The appearance of Qing Lan and the others had given them some hope in the face of despair. However, all of this needed time to settle down. They didn't even have the chance to do so before the Outer Realm Protoss attacked. How is this possible? This time, whether it was Yi Zichen, Gu Li, Pilar, Qing Lan, or Song Xiong, they were all astonished. When they looked at each other, they saw disbelief in each other's eyes. Bringing the great emperors to this place was the result of their discussion. It was precisely because they knew Yi Zichen was the third era's only hope of transcending. So long as Yi Zichen didn't transcend, this game wouldn't begin. The Outer Realm Protoss couldn't attack the third era before the game began, so they could take advantage of this time to make their preparations. They're here, but the Outer Realm Protoss had come. They're here because they attacked. The border we left in the Outer Realm was destroyed by their yuan-breaking beasts. None of the border guards survived, said Yang Jian. That's impossible. Suddenly, Guli shouted from within the hall. The outside's invasion requires the third era to transcend. Yi Zichen and I are the only lords of the Emperor's Star. I haven't transcended, and neither has Yi Zichen. Why would the outside attack? Chapter 1773. It wasn't hard to tell from Gu Li's tone that he suspected Qing Lan and Pilar were one of them. Generally speaking, they'd heard news of the god race's invasion from the two of them. However, Qing Lan and Song Xiong's information was limited to the god race's division of power. As for the actual invasion, Yi Zichen looked at Gu Li. From his expression, it wasn't hard to tell that he suspected Pilar, who'd once been a demon king. After the god race returned, and Su Yin did her best to heal him, Yi Zichen was out of danger. Then, he called Pilar and the others over to discuss countermeasures. During this time, Pilar explicitly mentioned that the only condition for the god race to attack was for the era to transcend. The Master of the Laws had set the rules. The god race could ignore them and break the balance to attack the era ahead of time. However, not long ago, Yale had angered the Master of the Laws. In the short term, if the god race ignored the Master of the Laws' rules and rashly attacked the era, they'd be provoking the Master of the Laws. In order to protect the Master of the Law's dignity, they couldn't let that happen. They'd use thunderous methods to suppress the god race, at the very least in the near future. In fear of the Master of the Law's wrath, they didn't dare provoke them further. Because of this, and because of their trust in Pilar, the era had been relatively safe until they transcended. That was how they had come up with a series of defense plans. But now, only 3 short days had passed since they'd started their discussion. They'd just gathered the great emperors, and now the god race was attacking. Were they really unafraid of the master of the laws? Were they really going to attack the era? At least, Guli didn't think that was likely. From what Yizichin and the others had told him, he could sense that the god emperor respected the master of the laws, no matter what his subordinates did. So long as he was present, he absolutely wouldn't let them offend him again. There was only one possibility for the god race's attack. They hadn't broken the rules. Neither Yizichin nor Guli had transcended, and the outsiders hadn't broken the rules of the game. Didn't that mean Pilar was lying? He wasn't lying. Could someone else have transcended? Guli's chest heaved violently. His expression was unfriendly, especially his eyes. Even when he smiled, they didn't seem like the slightest bit of sunshine. Instead, they seemed somewhat sinister. At this moment, his gaze was even more gloomy, and his expression was so gloomy that it seemed as if it could drip water. Everyone present understood the situation. Whether it was the great emperor or Gu Li's gaze on Pilar, they all knew exactly who he was talking about. Pilar was too lazy to pretend to be ignorant, so he directly brought this hidden target to the surface. Are you suspecting me? Why not? Guli didn't try to hide anything. You told me, and Yizichin yourself, that the only condition for the god race's invasion was for the era to transcend. In the third era, the heavens chose 2 emperors, and only the 2 of us received the blessings of the Emperor's Star. I haven't transcended, and neither has Yizichin. Could there be a third person? I can't be bothered to argue with you. Yizichin, you have to trust me. Pilar didn't directly respond to Guli's question. Instead, he looked at the frowning Yizichin. Whether or not I lied to you, or whether or not I had any reason to lie to you, I'm sure you know the answer. All the great emperors were paying close attention. They were just outsiders to this matter. They wouldn't be swayed by a few words from Guli. Besides, they didn't know much about him. The only thing they knew about him was that he'd once served the demons. Guli didn't have much of an advantage over Pilar, and they didn't trust him much. The only one who could sway them was Yizichin. Yizichin met Pilar's gaze, took a deep breath, then smiled at Guli. Now's not the time to worry about who's right and who's wrong. You trust him? Guli knit his brows. Yizichin nodded. When he saw this, Guli's expression grew even more unsightly. Just as the veins on his arms bulged, and he was about to open his mouth to question Yizichin, Yizichin cut him off. I know what you're thinking, but there are some things you don't understand. I'm sorry, I hid some things from you. Once we're done with our current problems, I'll tell you everything. With that, no matter what Guli did, Yizichin gestured for him to stop talking. The other great emperor's expressions didn't look too good either, especially the dragon god and the king of the east, who just joined the Upheaval Alliance. Yizichin's concealment made them feel like they were pawns. Even in the upper 3 realms, they were all famous figures. Being treated as a chess piece on a chessboard was a feeling that he had not felt for tens of thousands of years. Everyone, it seems the situation is worse than we thought. From his vantage point, Yizichin took in all the great emperor's expressions. Although the situation was dire, he couldn't help but smile. The Outerium god race is attacking at this moment. Although I've been caught off guard by their attack, it's not entirely a bad thing for us. I'm only saying that because you're all here. The great emperor's expressions trembled, and they stared intently at Yizichin. I refuse to believe the god race will attack in full force this time. We haven't figured out how strong they are, so even if they do, they won't be able to gather enough information on us. This attack is, at most, the most shallow test. That's right, said Yang Jian. The monkey and I want to take a look just now. It seems they've only brought a few dozen soul-shattering beasts and a few 100,000 deities. Yizichin smiled and nodded. That's just a probe. Since the god race isn't attacking in full force, there's nothing to be afraid of. All the great emperors are here. Do you really think they can crush our era with so few people? But if we all go out, doesn't that mean? They don't know. Yizichin saw right through the great emperor's thoughts. They only know a little about us. In fact, they might not even know as much about us as we do about them. They have no way of knowing that you're our era's strongest forces. Your appearance will only make them think we're just responding to a sudden attack. That's why I said this attack might not necessarily be a bad thing for us. His expression suddenly changed. However, when they launched an attack, we just had to deal with it with such a powerful force. They will be afraid of us. Chapter 1774. Will they be afraid? Yi Zichen swore solemnly, but when the other great emperors heard this, they couldn't help but wonder if he was telling the truth. Up until now, they hadn't truly come into contact with the Ouroboros divine race. The Ouroboros divine race's bugle call to attack was an unprecedented pressure to them. However, no matter how much pressure they felt, it didn't matter now. The god race had already fought their way to their homeland. They vowed to fight to the death. That was the only thought in their hearts. Where are they? I'm going to meet them. I refuse to believe they're stronger than the sword in my hand. Buzz, the hidden dragon sword suddenly appeared in Bian's hands. He swung it with all his might. Even though he hadn't released his divine power, he still left a deep gash in the hull. The silver sword in Bian's hands cried out fiercely. This sword had long since fused with Bian. It could clearly feel Bian's intentions, which was only battle. Bian was unyielding, but his sword alone cut through the great emperor's nightmares. Why should they be afraid? All the people standing here had their own pride. They were all imperial lords who could take charge of their own affairs. They hadn't even seen the outside realm god race yet, but they'd already been intimidated. How laughable. The atmosphere in the hall had changed. From the eyes of all the great emperors, one could see their vigorous fighting spirit and hot-bloodedness. The outside realm god race was terrifying. They destroyed the first era, which had once transcended. But this was absolutely no reason for the great emperors to lament. They had to face them. Even if the outside realm god race were primordial beasts or abyssal demons, even if they died, they had to die on the battlefield. Take us there. The great emperors unsheathed their treasures, their spirits high. Yang Jian and the great sage instinctively glanced at Yi Zichen. When they saw him nod, their gazes grew solemn, and their auras surged forth like a tidal wave. Let's go. Countless streaks of light sliced through the sky. Whether or not they'd make it back alive was still unknown. The moment the great emperors set out, they'd already cast their lives aside. Sang Xiong, let's go take a look as well. After the great emperors left, Qing Lan and Sang Xiong looked at each other. Good. It'd be best if that little bastard Yale comes as well. I'll definitely make him pay for losing my arm. Not long later, only Yi Zichen and company were left in the hall. Guli didn't follow the great emperors. He knew full well how weak he was. Even if he followed, he'd only be a burden. What's more, he had quite a bit of a problem with Yi Zichen. Even now, Yi Zichen still trusted Pilar. Guli. When Yi Zichen spoke, Xiao Yumei, who was beside him, could clearly feel his grip on her arm tighten, while it continuously trembled. When she looked at Yi Zichen's face, she saw that it was as pale as a sheet. His face was covered in sweat, and the back of his neck was also completely soaked. Noticing this, Xiao Yumei's heart sank. She pulled Yi Zichen back with all her might and poured her divine power into his body, only to discover that he refused to absorb it at all. Instead, he expelled it. What happened to you? Guli sensed Yi Zichen's abnormality and frowned. Yi Zichen's aura grew even weaker, and his pitch-black eyes gradually turned gray. He reached out to grab Guli's hand, but as he did, his eyes widened and he coughed up a mouthful of faint golden blood. It splattered onto the carpet in the hall. Zichen, what a dazzling display of colors. It's just a pity that this work of art will soon vanish from the face of the Milky Way. The white-robed man stood in the sky, facing the home planet of the gods, Yao, and demons. He wasn't stingy with his praise. Behind him were dozens of aura-shattering beasts, as well as numerous god race experts. How is this art? At most, it's just raw material that hasn't been sculpted yet. When he heard that, he snorted. He had his own pursuit of art. In his eyes, this wasn't even a complete work of art. True art is destruction, fragmentation, and the flowing of crimson blood. That is a true work of art. I agree with you, said the white-robed man with a chuckle. Now that his art had been acknowledged, his eyes shone with obvious satisfaction. He narrowed his eyes. So long as he calmed down, he could feel his heart racing. He was incredibly excited. He was excited that, in the near future, he'd be able to complete a work of creation. This work would be his pinnacle. No, to him, his pinnacle would always be his next work. But this work of art would make his soul feel the most satisfied pleasure. He was too excited. He couldn't wait to get to work on it. No, more accurately, he wanted to see his work of art and create the pinnacle for him. Whoosh, whoosh. A rain of arrows tore through the air. The first to bear the brunt of the attack was a beam of golden light, followed by a beam of black light hidden in the darkness. Behind them were countless beams of light of different colors, like rainbows streaking across the sky in beautiful arcs. I didn't expect them to arrive so quickly. It seems they had a warning. The white-robed man pursed his lips into a smile. His eyes flashed with excitement. These people's auras aren't bad. If I'm not mistaken, they're the elites of this era. Isn't that what you're hoping for? The white-clothed man said with a smile. The more elites that come, won't the artworks that you carve be able to give you a satisfactory answer to the greatest extent? Freedom. I didn't know you had such a high standard for art. You're not bad, said his mother. Art brings joy to people's hearts. It's something that everyone has to pursue. Good, good, good. Dressed as a clown, his mother laughed wantonly. At this moment, the great sage and the other great emperors arrived at the outer space. They didn't say anything. Their surging auras pressed down on the god clan. Friend of this era, we mean no harm. All of a sudden, the white-robed man smiled and waved his hand. When he waved his hand, the pressure released by the great sage and the others vanished into thin air on the god clan's side. The great emperor's faces darkened. The great sage and Yang Jian, who stood at the front, glared at the white-clothed man, his mother, and the others. Chapter 1775. Yang Jian and the others had never actually met the two divine kings before. The main reason why he was able to deduce their status was because of the Yale over gods behind them, as well as the aura they unintentionally released. Only divine kings from the outer realms could neutralize the pressure of the great emperors with a wave of their hands. Yang Jian and the great sage looked at each other. They could see an indescribable sense of gravity and pressure in each other's eyes. The situation was worse than they'd imagined. No one would have thought that the vanguard would be led by two divine kings. Everyone be careful. The Outer Realm divine race has sent two divine kings. Yang Jian transmitted to the great emperors around him. He didn't have the time to pay attention to the changes in the great emperor's expressions. Yang Jian took a few steps forward. As he moved forward, the Outer Realm divine race's Yuan breaker beasts roared with wide eyes. The raging, fishy wind made Yang Jian's hair dance wildly. He suddenly raised his hand, and a three-tipped, double-edged blade appeared in his palm. Black air swirled around his blade, and the whistling, fishy wind was cut to the sides. I wonder which two divine kings have come. Freedom. The man in white smiled and rubbed his red nose. He made a pose and said unhappily, I don't like people calling me the God King. You can call me the great artist, His Excellency. As soon as it finished speaking, it suddenly appeared in front of Yang Jian. His face was almost stuck to Yang Jian's, and he sized him up for a long time. Yang Jian didn't take a single step back. He proudly puffed out his chest and looked down at the clown in front of him. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. After a few flips, he returned to the Outer Realm divine race's side. You really are a piece of unpolished jade. If you're carefully carved, you'll definitely become an exceptional work of art. Hey, you flatter me. Yang Jian snorted with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Qinglan and Song Xiong, who were slightly behind them, also hurried over. When they saw Freedom Divine King and Pleasure Divine King, their shock was obvious. Freedom Divine King and Pleasure Divine King also noticed their arrival. Sword of Heaven and Earth, Silver Moon Azure Bear. Freedom Divine King. Qinglan cupped her hands in greeting. At this moment, her eyes shone with excitement, and her face was distorted with excitement. Xiaolon, you're here too. Huh? His twisted expression caused everyone to shiver from the bottom of their hearts. Yang Jian and the great sage practically spoke at the same time through the divine sense network of the great era emperors. What does that funny guy do? He's a psychopath, Song Xiong replied. Don't underestimate that funny guy. He's the God King of pleasure, the leader of the 4 great God Kings. This guy always felt that he was an artist, but the so-called works of art he created were all perverted. In short, he was a psychopath. Through him, this so-called creation is to give oneself physical and mental pleasure. The head of the God Kings. All the great emperors were stunned. Yang Jian and the great sage didn't expect the clown to be so strong. What's the situation with the Freedom God King? His situation is rather special. This time, it was Qinglan who answered through divine sense. He used to be a master god under the Darkness God King. Later, the Darkness God King died for some reason, and he inherited the God King's position, becoming the Freedom God King. He's always behaved himself in the God race, and he doesn't seem to have any ambition. Back then, the other master gods and god emperors forced him to take the position. He doesn't like fighting, so why would he appear here? I don't understand. He's probably lost. It's not like we haven't seen such examples before. Song Xiong snorted angrily. It was obvious that Song Xiong knew quite a bit about the Outerium gods, but he didn't continue. But even if he didn't say anything, just the information before them was enough. The ones who'd come were indeed 2 Outerium god kings, and there were quite a few master god experts as well. From this, it seemed that the Outerium gods' attack wasn't a probing attack. It would be very troublesome to deal with them. Huh. Her expression twisted as she stared at Qinglan. Even without her gaze, the surrounding people couldn't help but feel a chill run down their spines. Xiaolon, sticking out her tongue and tilting her head, her contorted face slowly moved forward. Qinglan reached out her hand and held her head in a practiced manner, as if she'd done this action countless times. Then, she pushed her back to her original position with her right hand. Lord Her Majesty, the time for the bet hasn't passed yet. Is that so? The time isn't up yet? Its expression returned to normal in an instant, but not long after, it tilted its head again, its cheeks flushed with honey. Xiaolan, it's great that you're still alive. Do you know how worried I was when you suddenly disappeared? Thank you for your concern, Lord Her Majesty, Qinglan said with her usual expression. That's great. You're the best treasure I've ever set my eyes on. Only I can sculpt you into the most perfect work of art. Xiaolan, don't wait too long. Very soon, you'll become the most dazzling masterpiece in my exhibition room. Her Majesty had completely entered a state of oblivion. She spread her arms and raised her head to speak freely to herself. This was definitely a twisted fellow. Seeing this scene, the disgust in everyone's hearts grew, especially the Jade Lake Palace Master and the other empresses. They subconsciously hugged their shoulders, not daring to look at Her Majesty's twisted face. Sort of heaven and earth. Joy God King seems to like you very much, said the Freedom God King with a smile. Then I'll have to disappoint him, Qinglan laughed. Qinglan chuckled. And here I thought Yale would be the one to come here. Why are you here instead? Yale? That idiot deliberately harmed the master of the laws, so his divine sea was sealed. He's probably repenting in the divine palace right now. I've carried on his wishes and brought all his main gods here to enjoy the opening of this feast. The Freedom God King turned around and pointed at the warrior woman behind him. God tier, main gods. In other words, the game has begun, right? You can say that, said the Freedom God King, spreading his hands. But please believe me, we have no ill intentions. No ill intentions? Then why are all the people we left in the outside dead? Yang Jian frowned. You mean those guys? My battle beasts were a little hungry, so I used them to fill their stomachs. But you must believe me, we really have no ill intentions. Our goal here is to personally witness the opening of the feast. Suddenly, the eyes of the era's great emperors darkened. Chapter 1776. There weren't many people from the Outer Realm god race. There were less than 100 origin breaker beasts, and all of them were walking beasts. The number of true gods was roughly estimated to be less than 300,000. Anyone would think that this was just a probing attack, and that these people were only the vanguard sent by the Outer Realm god race. Yet in this vanguard there were 2 divine kings and a dozen main gods. With such a sudden attack, before the epic could even take any defensive measures, the divine kings and main gods could ignore the epic and march straight in. The epic would certainly fall into panic. At that time, regardless of whether the Outer Realm god race wanted to destroy the epic or toy with it, they would have the absolute initiative. But they didn't do so. They stayed outside the epic and waited for the epic's experts to leave the epic. Why would they do that? The Outer Realm god race's goal was to destroy the epic. Why would they worry about destroying the epic's framework? If this premise was true, why didn't they show any intention of fighting after arriving outside the epic? They even mentioned several times that they didn't have any ill intentions. They just want to see the opening of the feast. Who would be the one to start the feast? The opening of the feast is naturally the opening of the feast. Forgive me for not being able to answer your question. Freedom Divine King smiled at Yang Jian, then raised his head to look at the chaotic void in front of him. Everyone, just stay here and wait. The surrounding great emperor's gazes were solemn. They couldn't understand the meaning behind Freedom Divine King's words. Suddenly, the great emperors recalled what they heard in Chaos City Hall about the Outer Realm's opportunity to attack the epic. You're waiting for the epic to transcend. Why do we have to wait? Freedom Divine King didn't understand. Not good. That Pilar really was lying. Yang Jian and the great sage looked at each other. They couldn't help but blurt out their thoughts. Before he finished speaking, the Freedom God King revealed a look of understanding. That's all you care about. I didn't understand what you meant. I'll explain on behalf of His Majesty Devil King. He didn't lie to you. The rules of the game indeed require you to transcend here. Transcending means you're declaring war on us. Only then can we accept the challenge. A chill suddenly rose from the great emperor's feet. They practically froze as they looked at Freedom Divine King. You mean, don't you know? Your era has already transcended. How is this possible? If Guli was here, he would definitely shout it out. He and Yi Zichen were heaven's chosen twin emperors. Neither of them had transcended. So how could anyone else? The great sovereigns in the outer domain were completely stunned by this answer. Unknowingly, many great sovereigns felt their scalps go numb. Such a transformative answer was something that none of them had expected. The era had transcended. The Freedom Divine King actually said that the third era had already transcended. Gu Xuanda and Qing Li, who were also in the extraterritorial void, looked at each other. They were the ones who were the closest to transcending. If someone had really transcended in this era, it was impossible for them not to sense it. Looks like you guys are quite surprised. That's right. You guys wouldn't know about this. The Freedom Divine King nodded slightly when he saw the shocked expressions on everyone's faces. It's normal that you can't sense it. The one who transcended in your era did so through some special means. During this period of time, His Majesty and I were concealing his aura, so of course you couldn't feel it. At the same time, the Freedom Divine King's contortions eased slightly. However, his gaze remained fixed on Qing Lan, his eyes flashing with greed and passion. Little Lan, very soon, you'll become my favorite work of art. You're like an unpolished jade. I'll work hard to carve and polish you. Don't worry. No one paid any attention to His Majesty's mutterings. The great emperors were completely immersed in the shock of the Freedom Divine King's words. They're luring the tiger away from the mountain. Not good. Yi and the others are in danger. Yang Jian's eyes widened. Then he transformed into a wisp of black mist and shot into the new era. Before he'd even traveled 100 meters, a seal appeared in front of him. When he looked around, no one noticed that hundreds of extraterritorial gods had appeared around the epic emperors at some point in time. Above their heads, their godheads flashed with dazzling light. The power of their godheads intersected, forming an impenetrable barrier around them. No matter how much Yang Jian used his divine power, it would only be absorbed by the grid and become nourishment making the grid even more sturdy. You're dreaming if you want to break it by force. The Freedom Divine King laughed. This is the God-trapping formation. God-trapping formation. Upon hearing that, Qinglan looked around. The other great emperors communicated through their divine senses. What's the God-trapping formation? As the name suggests, the God-trapping formation is used to trap gods. The God-trapping formation was set up by 999 higher gods with similar flows of godheads. Their divine powers blended together and weaved into a barrier net. All the divine powers released by the formation will become nourishment for the God-trapping formation. Even a divine king will find it difficult to break it from the inside. Qinglan's eyes narrowed. It was obvious that Gushwanda and Qinglan had heard of the God-trapping formation. Their eyes shone with seriousness, but they didn't make any rash moves. It's difficult to break it from the inside, but it's easy to break it from the outside, said the Dragon Emperor, who had some attainments in formations. It is very easy. From a moment that the God-trapping formation was set up, the high gods outside would have no way to defend against it. Even if it was an ordinary low-level true god, as long as he attacked one of them, his divine power would no longer be synchronized with the other divine powers, and the formation would be broken. The problem is, we're all stuck in there, right? Is that so? Qinglan frowned. Even though he was quite accomplished in formations, he did not know how to break the formation at this time. Since that's the case, let's find. As soon as he took out his phone, Yang Jian and the others wanted to send a few urgent messages in the group. However, there was no signal network here. Could it be that he really couldn't get out? The great thearchs in the God-trapping array looked at their surroundings and the eggshell-like barrier above their heads. The Freedom Divine King maintained his smile. Don't be afraid, everyone. I really don't have any ill intentions towards you. I've already said this countless times. You just need to stay here with peace of mind and watch the opening of this feast. I can guarantee that nothing will happen to you and the people who are important to you. An important person. Who is the important person you mentioned just now? Shu. Chapter 1777. Red. Everything was red. Drops of blood flowed. Regardless of whether it was the ancient trees, the rocks, the cobblestone path, or the verdant bamboo forest, everything was dyed red by the blood. The clear pond had turned red. The water was no longer clear, but blood. Countless severed limbs and remains littered the ground, and a thick aura of death enveloped the sky. Vaguely, they seemed to be able to hear the wails of the dead that had turned into malicious spirits. They died unwillingly or with grievances. Even in death, they hadn't understood why the emperor they'd once trusted and adored had become their executioner. The God Emperor. Zhou Wu, I won't let you off even if I become a ghost. Miserable screams echoed through the air. They'd done it. Their souls hadn't returned to the river Styx after their deaths. Instead, they'd used their obsessions to coil around the central divine mountain, using their resentment and aura of death to conjure frightening skeletons. They hovered in the air, gazing down at Zhou Wu, their hair disheveled. Bathed in blood, Zhou Wu smiled cruelly. This emperor has transcended. His purple dragon robe was still dripping with blood. Zhou Wu stared blankly at his hands. His hands were scabbed with blood. Of course, the blood wasn't his, but the blood of every living thing in Heavenly God City, or rather, the entire Central Divine Mountain. Several months ago, no one knew what he'd experienced. He'd sealed off the entire mountain and slaughtered his way through it. He'd lost count of how many he'd killed. He'd killed so many that he'd grown numb to it. Whether it was women, children, old, young, or old subordinates who'd always followed him, he'd shown no mercy. As long as they were alive and within the range of his divine sense, not a single one survived. Not a single one of them survived. It was also his brutal march of slaughter that had turned this city, this divine mountain, into a sea of corpses and blood. Zhou Wu. The resentful skeletons in the sky screamed shrilly as they charged at Zhou Wu. The howling wind sent chills down Zhou Wu's spine. The fact that even someone at his level of cultivation felt a chill was proof of how heavy the resentment was. The 300-meter-tall skeleton opened its bloody maw. Even an imperial lord would shudder at the sight of a skeleton made of resentment. They wouldn't dare face it head-on. He shook his hand. The motionless Zhou Wu clenched his fist across space as the worldly laws collapsed under his grip. The skeleton that was formed from resentment also disintegrated the moment the laws shattered, turning into countless resentful spirits that howled as they pounced at Zhou Wu. Ridiculous. He raised his hand, and a giant palm appeared in the void. His palm landed on the vengeful spirit, and in an instant, all of the vengeful spirits were wiped out and their souls scattered. He did the same to the other skeletons. Even if several sovereign emperors were here, they would not be able to escape from the Azura field. Yet, Zhou Wu destroyed it with a flick of his finger. Zhou Wu. The wails of countless vengeful spirits resounded through the sky, but Zhou Wu did not seem to hear them. He continued looking at his hands silently. He was already numb to it. He was already used to this kind of mournful screams. After all, he had been cursed by these vengeful spirits for the past few months. He didn't care about any of this. He didn't care if they were people of the sacred mountain or if they were cursed or resentful. The only thing he cared about was he'd succeeded. Ha ha. Ha ha. Ha. Mountains and rivers shattered, and the wind and clouds churned. Zhou Wu threw his head back and roared, completely ignoring the collapse of the city he'd poured his blood, sweat, and tears into. He ignored the shattering of the void and the turbulence of space around him. Who said I wasn't fated to do so? Who said I wasn't fated to do so? Boom! Seawater gushed out of the central divine mountain, and lava erupted from the volcanoes. Even more shocking was the divine mountain that had existed since the birth of the new era had shattered. The moment the divine mountain shattered, the restrictions around it also shattered. The Yao race. A middle-aged man dressed in azure sat on the ground in a lush, verdant mountain. Two balls of light hovered over his shoulders, one black and one white. They coiled around him. Suddenly, he opened his eyes. A golden chessboard appeared beneath his feet. He stood in the middle of the chessboard, his eyes constantly moving around the chessboard. Not good. The azure-robed man's eyes trembled. Just as he was about to leave the lush mountain, a barrier of divine power appeared in front of him. Space trembled, and a man in white appeared in front of the light barrier. The man had a smile on his face. The man smiled and said, "No one can ruin the beginning of the banquet. Yao, Emperor of the Yao race, you can stay here in peace." God race, God king? Who is it? The azure-robed man frowned. It really is you, East Monarch Tai. When the second era was destroyed, I knew you wouldn't die. As for me, I'm the Freedom God King. The white-robed man smiled. A former chief god has become a god king. Not bad, not bad. I didn't expect the Freedom God King to find this place. It looks like the Freedom God King had a plan. Zhou Wu was not destined to transcend fate, but now he is transcended. It should be because of you, right? I don't have that ability. It's the Joy God King. Huh. Demon the Archdong Wong laughed heartily. However, his smile wasn't as friendly as before. Instead, he looked at the Freedom Divine King with hostility. You dare let that madman Zhou Wu transcend? Aren't you afraid he'll rebel against you? He wouldn't dare. The Freedom God King smiled. You don't know me, but the Joy God King is an old God King. You should know him. I believe you also know how meticulous he is. What price did Zhou Wu pay? His soul. You sold your soul just for a dream. Demon Emperor Dongwang sneered. Indeed, it was for a dream. But at least this dream satisfied his inner obsession, didn't it? Even if it was a dream, he was willing. Moreover, it wasn't a dream. At least, he could have fun for a few days. As for what I have to do, I'll stop you and not let you cause trouble. That's enough. The Freedom God King smiled with his hands behind his back. East Monarch nodded and didn't resist. He returned to the praying mat and looked at the trickling stream in front of him without saying a word. You're not going out? I've seen the God King's methods. Moreover, you made such a meticulous plan. I don't think I can force my way out. East Monarch said, I like to deal with smart people. The Freedom God King smiled. It's best that you don't resist. Otherwise, I would have to waste a lot of effort to deal with your star. Chapter 1778. A trickle of water flowed slowly. Demon Emperor Dongwang casually threw the pebble into the stream. The pebble splashed water and left ripples on the stream. The Freedom Divine King's gaze was also attracted by the ripples. He only retracted his gaze after the ripples dissipated. A star that survived? The Freedom Divine King smiled at Demon Emperor Dong Huang and snapped his fingers. Suddenly, the stream water in front of Demon Emperor Dong Huang flowed backward and spewed into the void, forming a huge water screen. The Demon Emperor, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground, frowned. Divine power gathered around him to form a mirror that blocked the splashing water. Then his eyes darkened, and he vaguely glanced at the Freedom God King. The Freedom Divine King's methods were truly brilliant. This was originally his residence. Be it the mountains, the stream, or the vegetation, they were all enveloped by his domain. The Freedom Divine King appeared within the range of his domain and set up this layer of boundary so that he couldn't see through it. He also forcefully destroyed the domain that he had formed and cast spells within the domain, not allowing any resistance. This was a realm that was definitely above him. Half a step was far from enough. Demon Emperor Dong Huang muttered to himself. The Freedom Divine King's methods didn't make him feel defeated. Actually, the two of them hadn't really fought until now, so there was no sense of defeat. However, the Freedom Divine King's superior realm made Dong Huang Tai truly feel it. I wonder if the stars that the Demon Emperor is referring to are these. At this moment, the Freedom Divine King smiled lightly. Demon Emperor Dong Huang looked towards the water screen formed by the stream. Break it for me. I don't believe that this broken barrier can't be broken. In the middle of the water screen was a beautiful young lady. Her eyes were filled with anger as she urged the people around her to release their divine power, to break the boundary in front of her. The people within the boundary really didn't hold back. The spiritual power in their bodies surged, and dazzling spiritual techniques blasted on the boundary. However, no matter how these people attacked, the boundary that trapped them didn't have a single ripple. "My lord, let our people stop." The old man sighed sadly. Among the people inside the barrier, it was not difficult to tell that this old man was the strongest among them. However, of all the people inside the barrier, only he didn't make a move. "Why haven't you done anything yet?" The girl in the water curtain shouted angrily. Flames could almost be seen gushing out from her pupils. "Break it for me." "Master, it's not that this old servant doesn't want to move, it's just that I can't break it." The old man sighed deeply and looked at the barrier around them. As expected of God King, even if this old servant and my old subordinates self-destructed, they wouldn't be able to shake this barrier in the slightest. "Master, we can't get out this time." "I don't believe it." The eyes of the girl in the water curtain suddenly turned red, and the blood vessels on her charming face suddenly burst. Not long after, her hair turned fiery red, and 10 scarlet tails appeared behind her. "Break!" Clenching her fists, the young girl who had transformed into a 10-tailed fire fox punched the barrier. "My lord!" The old man shouted anxiously. The power of this punch could be said to be astonishing. Just the wind generated from this punch was enough to crush the ground beneath her feet. When the fist landed on the barrier, it actually caused a ripple that had not appeared even after so many people had attacked it before. However, this punch only caused a ripple to appear in the barrier. After that, the ripple reflected all the power it had just endured. Boom! Puff! The young girl, who was still in the posture of swinging her fist, suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. The old man and the others inside the barrier rushed in front of the young girl. "My lord," the young girl, who was seriously injured by the reflected power, couldn't help but cough up blood. However, her eyes kept looking in the direction of the old man's punch, looking at the barrier that gradually calmed down without leaving any trace. The young girl's eyes inexplicably shed tears of unwillingness. "I promised him. I clearly promised him. We have an agreement. How can I go back on my word again?" The young girl couldn't help but choke with sobs. Blood still flowed out of her mouth, and she kept muttering the same words to herself. From her eyes, one could see how indignant she was right now. In the end, she struggled to stretch out her hand towards the place where she had previously punched. Her eyes were filled with unwillingness as she looked at the barrier until her hand fell powerlessly. Sacred medicine. Bring me the sacred medicine. At this moment, the water curtain condensed and the void also shattered, falling into the stream and flowing into the distance. Demon Emperor Dongwang, who had witnessed this scene with his own eyes, looked even more solemn than before. The Freedom Divine King smiled contentedly. She crossed her arms and looked at Demon Emperor Dongwang, who was also trapped in the barrier. My principle is to be meticulous. Knowing that there are survivors from the Second Era, how can I not be fully prepared? I have been keeping an eye on you, the stars that survived from the Second Era, for a long time. Knowing that you will spoil my plans, how can I let you go? While talking and laughing, the Freedom Divine King lightly snorted. This is just one of them. Do you want me to show you the situation of the other stars? There's no need. Demon Emperor Dongwang, who was sitting in front of the stream, gently waved his hand, indicating that the Freedom Divine King did not need to continue. The previous water curtain was enough to make him believe that the other stars had suffered the same treatment. It was obvious that the Freedom Divine King and the others had planned for this moment for a long time. It was so meticulous that Demon Emperor Dongwang could not help but feel his scalp go numb. They forced Zhou Wu to transcend and made him pay the price of his soul. Then, they trapped all the surviving stars from the Second Era, making it difficult for them to unleash their heat. If nothing went wrong, the god race would definitely have contacted the other almighties of the god, monster, and demon races to cause internal strife. They wanted to use the hands of the new era to destroy it. How ruthless! Why are you looking at me like that? Feeling Demon Emperor Dongwang's gaze, the Freedom Divine King frowned. It's been 3 eras. You are about to be destroyed for 3 eras. Until now, you have not learned your lesson and still want to try and resist. Ever since the First Era came into contact with the Third Era's Star-Lord, the Second Era's Star-Lord thought that he was infallible, thinking that he could conceal the heavenly secrets and let the remnants of the Second Era survive. You want to launch a counterattack against our god race in the Third Era? What a joke. How can the transcendence of the god race be compared to your physical bodies? We want to let you know that resistance will only result in destruction. Oh, you said that we are stubborn. But even after doing this, do you still not understand? Demon Emperor Dongwang nodded. At this moment, a golden light suddenly appeared under his feet. Chapter 1779. This spiritual pressure. The experts of the Era Sacred Mountain all felt a surging spiritual pressure sweep over them. Everyone stopped in their tracks and looked into the distance. Then they saw that the central divine mountain was surrounded by thick, bloody clouds. The pungent stench of blood emanated from the central divine mountain. Before long, the entire human territory was enveloped in this stench. How cruel! On a blood-colored cloud in the sky outside the central divine mountain, a man surrounded by an aura of death rubbed his hands together excitedly. Half a month ago, I already felt that the death chi here was heavy, but I didn't expect it to be this heavy. An entire divine mountain's people died. Just how much resentment is there? I didn't expect that I would have this kind of luck. If this resentment is taken away by me, I might be able to step into the realm that I've been dreaming of. I wonder how many treasures can be refined from these corpses. Once I recover, Su Qingyan, Bayan, just you wait. I'll definitely refine you into shamans. The man surrounded by death, Qi, smiled sinisterly. At this moment, he didn't dare to advance rashly. Zhou Wu was inside the divine mountain, and he could sense the danger hidden in Zhou Wu's aura. Being able to hide in the blood cloud was already considered a bold move. If he had been careless and exposed his aura, he might have become one of the corpses below. Fortunately, the central divine mountain was surrounded by an aura of death, which allowed him to conceal himself very well. Now, all he had to do was wait for Zhou Wu to leave. He did not even need to absorb all the deathly aura here. All he needed to do was take a few bites to restore his primordial chi. This Zhou Wu really is ruthless. He slaughtered an entire divine mountain just to pave his transcendence path. It's too cruel. Even I can't bear to watch it. The man in the blood cloud muttered. At this moment, this emperor is the only one in this world who has transcended. Zhou Wu, who was standing proudly in the sky, laughed maniacally. As he laughed wantonly, the surrounding blood, qi, and resentment gathered in his body. F***ck. The man in the sanguine cloud instantly widened his eyes. Having studied the aura of death, he could clearly see the surrounding aura of death being forcefully absorbed by Zhou Wu. The death energy and blood energy had completely become his nourishment. As he absorbed them, his aura rose step by step. My treasure! The man watched helplessly as Zhou Wu absorbed the surrounding lifeblood and deathly auras. His heart ached as he watched. This was a piece of fat meat that he had been eyeing for a long time. No, Zhou Wu wasn't a corpse refiner, so why would he feed on death aura and blood aura? Could it be that even a god emperor had fallen? Zhou Wu, who was laughing maniacally, opened his mouth wide, causing the surrounding blood energy and death energy to rush into his mouth. When it surged in, Zhou Wu's body seemed to be reborn. The outer layer of old skin faded away, replaced by crystalline skin. His entire person was glowing. Although he was not considered old, he looked as if he had returned to his youth. I can't take it anymore. The man in the sanguine cloud had wanted to leave some leftovers after Zhou Wu had finished absorbing. But based on the current situation, he wouldn't be able to obtain anything if he didn't take action, much less leave. After lurking for so long, he wouldn't be willing to take advantage of Zhou Wu. The man in the cloud also opened his mouth slightly. However, he wasn't as unrestrained as Zhou Wu. He only opened his mouth a little, allowing Zhou Wu's deathly aura to condense into a thin thread and enter his mouth. He could only do so. In terms of strength, he was absolutely inferior to Zhou Wu. He was unwilling to return empty-handed, so he could only sneakily take advantage of Zhou Wu. Furthermore, he had to pray that Zhou Wu wouldn't discover him. However, the man in the cloud had only been absorbing for a few seconds. Lich King, Zhou Wu, who was absorbing the deathly aura, suddenly spoke. The man who was absorbing the deathly aura immediately froze. He secretly looked at Zhou Wu through the cloud layer, only to realize that Zhou Wu wasn't even looking in his direction. Am I hallucinating? Before his voice faded, Zhou Wu, who was standing in the sky, snorted again. I've already given you enough face. The deathly aura you absorbed just now should be enough to restore your vitality. Why aren't you scramming? Zhou Wu had noticed. The man in the cloud narrowed his eyes. It wasn't that he didn't notice Zhou Wu wasn't looking at him. Rather, Zhou Wu disdained to look in his direction. Disdain. I'm the mighty Lich King. How dare you treat me with disdain? Zhou Wu, you. Scram. You bastard. Why aren't you scramming? Don't go too far. You're using so much deathly aura for yourself. Aren't you being too overbearing? Let's talk things over. I have a grudge with Su Qingyan and the others. If you give me 20%, I'll help you. I need a piece of trash like you. Scram. If you don't, then you can accompany those guys down there. Gulp. Accompanying those guys down, there was the same as asking for his life. How could a mighty Lich King suffer such humiliation? Fine, Zhou Wu, just you wait. Even if I can't defeat you, there are plenty of people who can. The Lich King cursed in exasperation. Zhou Wu didn't even look at him. He simply extended a finger. A pillar of air tore through the air and slammed into the Lich King's cloud of blood. It exploded into a rain of blood. Damn it. Thank goodness I still made a profit. The fleeing Lich King couldn't help but curse. But it wasn't too bad. He hadn't suffered a loss this time. At the very least, he'd earned some deathly aura. Zhou Wu, you bastard, just you wait. If I don't give you. All of a sudden, a pillar of qi attacked him from behind. This time, the Lich King had no time to dodge. In a panic, he took out 3 puppets and threw them behind him. Even so, he coughed up a mouthful of blood and a bloody hole appeared in his shoulder. He'd originally made a small profit, but this time, he'd suffered a huge loss. Zhou Wu, you and I are irreconcilable enemies. Noisy. Up in the sky, Zhou Wu clenched his fists, then arched his brows. When he looked at the Lich King's collapsed space, he saw that the Lich King's figure was long gone. All that was left was a bloody mist and a calf. He'd run. Zhou didn't care too much about it. As for the Lich King's threat, he didn't even take it to heart. What was his current realm? Transcendence. In all three realms. Even if the ancients or the magi came, he wouldn't care? Threaten him? Was he afraid? The only thing he was afraid of was the two Emperor stars. After he transcended, not only had his cultivation improved, but he could also sense the existence of the Nirvana stars. Only then did he truly understand who the Emperor star of this era was. Divine Arbiter, I didn't think you'd deceive me too. Pain flashed through Zhou Wu's eyes. In all of the god, Yao, and demon realms, the only person he trusted the most was the Divine Arbiter. He'd always trusted the Divine Arbiter, so he'd thought the Emperor star belonged to someone else. He'd never imagined. He really hadn't. He'd never imagined that the person he trusted so much would also deceive him. This was a painful truth, but it was good. Zhou Wu smiled indifferently. Since the Divine Arbiter had deceived him, he no longer had to bear the guilt of slaughtering the Divine Clan. The Divine Arbiter's betrayal meant that there was no one else he could trust in this world. Chapter 1780. The wind howled. For some reason, Zhou Wu's figure seemed desolate as he stood in the sky. He'd thrown caution to the wind, throwing caution to the wind. In order to become the God Emperor, he'd used his heart to make a trade. In order to transcend, he'd used his soul as a bargaining chip. And now he'd done it. He'd become the only transcendent of this era. He wielded the power to destroy the world, but when he looked back, he no longer had anyone by his side. The Divine Arbiter he'd once trusted had deceived him. No one could share the joy of transcending with him. This loneliness and helplessness made Zhou Wu fall into a strange silence. What a detestable feeling. He glanced around at his empty surroundings. Aside from the howling wind, there was no other sound. Suddenly, Zhou Wu recalled the clown he'd encountered when he'd fled the Transcendence Tomb. That fellow hadn't lied to him. He'd kept his promise and helped him transcend. How laughable. In the end, the one who hadn't lied to him was a clown he'd never met. Zhou Wu knew the clown had ulterior motives. He'd sacrificed his own soul to achieve his current transcendence. But that was understandable. If you wanted something, you had to pay the price. Just as the clown had said, once he transcended, the truth he discovered would make him feel more lonely than he'd ever felt before. And that was exactly what the clown had said. He'd really been too lonely. He'd truly reached the pinnacle. There was no one by his side. The only thing keeping him company was the desolate wind. It was a truly detestable feeling. At least, Zhou Wu didn't like it. He reached into his robes, and a talisman appeared in his hand. The clown had given it to him. At the time, the clown had only told him to use it if he wanted to, and that he wouldn't force him if he didn't. Zhou Wu had sneered at him. How could he possibly use something like that? He was the God Emperor. He had to protect his people, lead the era to transcend, resist the outsiders, and ensure its survival. The people of the Central Divine Mountain had only sacrificed their lives to pave his path to transcendence. His original intentions hadn't changed, but now, the loneliness, the joy of not being able to share with others, made it hard for him to breathe. Suddenly, he had an idea. He didn't want to bear this sort of pressure. The talisman was torn apart. In the sky above the Central Divine Mountain, a spirit diagram emanating an aura of death suddenly appeared. The spirit diagram covered a vast area, enveloping the entire Central Divine Mountain. The purplish gray of death filled the air. At this moment, some of the dead people of the Divine Mountain suddenly crawled up from the ground. More and more people crawled up. Their eyes were lifeless, but that did not stop them from moving. After taking a simple look at the surroundings, the people who had been revived immediately knelt on the ground and faced the Divine Emperor. "Your Majesty, go!" With a gentle wave of his hand, the people who had been resurrected from the dead scattered in all directions as if they had already received an order. Zhou Wu was still standing in the void, looking at the people who had just been revived and then left him. His eyes were filled with indifference. What he needed to do was very simple, which was let the world enjoy loneliness. The feast has finally begun. The Freedom Divine King stared at Ji Yuan. The other great emperors in the god-trapping array also tried their best to spy on Ji Yuan's situation. Unfortunately, the god-trapping array had sealed their divine senses, and they were too far away. They couldn't see Ji Yuan's situation at all. They could only rely on the Freedom Divine King's whispers to determine what was going on inside the God Clan. Your Majesty, your work of art really didn't disappoint us. The Freedom Divine King glanced at him. Yang Jian and the others didn't know when he had regained his senses. He rested his hands on his cheeks and sat cross-legged in the sky. He looked in Ji Yuan's direction, his eyes flashing with excitement. Of course, from the moment I met him, I planted a seed in his heart. Plus, his soul is in my hands. It shouldn't be hard to control his state of mind, right? Your Majesty, I admire you. The two God Kings didn't try to hide their conversation. The great emperors in the god-trapping array could hear them. They had definitely seen something. Moreover, the way things were developing was something they would be happy to see. The great emperors were all trapped inside the array and couldn't leave. Hey, looks like you guys are a little anxious. The Freedom Divine King grinned and shrugged when he saw the anxious eyes of the great emperors. Don't panic. No matter how anxious you are, you can't get out. Why not just stay here? It's good for you, convenient for me, and good for the people important to you. What important people? What the hell are you talking about? One of the great emperors scolded angrily. This feeling of the unknown was the most disturbing. They knew very well what these people who were trapped represented. If they were trapped here, it meant that more than half of Ji Yuan's peak fighting power was limited. Every single person here was willing to shed their blood for this era, but at this moment, F*CK, the god-trapping array can't be broken from the inside, right? Then let them open it themselves. My grandson can't take it anymore. The great sage cursed in his anxiety. Then, the Rui Jingu Bang appeared in his hand. The Freedom Divine King was still smiling. He watched as the great sage swung the Jingu Bang at him. Then, he grinned and watched as the great sage's staff stopped just as it was about to fall on his head. The surging wind from the staff messed up everyone's hair. The great sage froze in midair, holding his staff. He glared at the woman next to the Freedom Divine King, who was strangled. Zixia, Fairy Zixia. Yang Jian, who was about to attack after the great sage, also stopped. This lady is your sweetheart, right? I have some impression of her. Victorious Fighting Buddha, Great Sage, Heaven's Equal, and Joker are all your titles, right? And this is the woman you love the most. The Freedom Divine King smiled and snapped his fingers. Then Zixia Fairy, who had been captured, yelled out, Joker, Z. Before the great sage could speak, another woman came out from behind the Freedom Divine King. Third princess. This time, it was Yang Jian who called out. The two women that had been brought out were the great sage and Yang Jian's true loves. Seeing their lovers captured, the two of them lost their fighting spirit. They gripped their weapons tightly, not daring to take another step forward. They knew very well that even if the god clans didn't say anything, as long as they dared to move forward and bare their fangs, their true loves would be turned to ashes in an instant. There was no doubt that the god clans had the ability to do that.